Denise Diane Flume in the mid-1980s. 18-year-old Denise Diane Flume was a senior at Connorsville High School in Indiana. A diligent student and promising athlete, Denise had already been accepted into Miami University of Ohio. She was active in several sports teams, including volleyball, basketball, softball, and track, and was a proud member of the National Honor Society. With plans to major in microbiology at university, she also hoped to earn a track scholarship. Unfortunately, Denise's tragic fate would prevent her from ever realizing her dreams. On March 28, 1986, Denise Diane Flume, just 18 years old, vanished without a trace. She had left her home in Everton, Indiana, where she lived with her parents and sister, driving her 1981 Buick Regal. Denise was on a mission to retrieve her missing handbag, which she believed she had left behind at a bonfire party held on nearby farmland the previous night. Although she had asked her friends to accompany her, none were available to go along. Tragically, would never return, and she has never been seen again. Denise decided to make the trip alone, though she did so reluctantly. Her mother, Judith, later remarked that it was unusual for her daughter to feel uneasy about going by herself, saying, "She was fearless ever since she was a child." Judith found it deeply unsettling that Denise, who had always been confident and independent, was so uncomfortable about returning to the party site. To her, it seemed as if something was amiss and the situation didn't feel right. The tenant of the farm where the party was held reported that Denise never arrived. A separate farmer working in a field in Glenwood, Indiana, around 3 miles from the party location, saw Denise's Buick that day at around 12:30 p.m., but not the driver. A friend, however, saw the 18-year-old at 2 o'clock p.m. at a fashion bug store on 30th Street in Connorsville. Although, it's noted that the woman was wearing different clothing than that which Denise wore when she left home earlier that afternoon. Denise never returned home from her trip and her parents never saw her again. The farmer near Glenwood who had noticed Denise's Buick still parked the following day alerted the county sheriff's department, speculating that the vehicle might have been abandoned. By this time, Denise's family had already reported her missing. However, the response from authorities was less than reassuring. The Flumes were told to stay calm and were reassured that Denise would likely return home soon. The police suggested that her disappearance might simply be a result of typical teenage behavior, implying that she was probably just acting out. Unsatisfied with this reply, though, Denise's family decided to try and look for her themselves, calling all of her friends, but to no avail. Afraid she'd crashed her car, they drove up and down the country searching for their daughter or any signs of a car wreck. Her father, David, recalled, quote, "We do not believe that she ever went back to the farm. Something or some person interrupted that opportunity to do so. We knew right away that something was wrong because she had never been out without our knowledge about where she was going to be. When the time unfolded until the next day and the subsequent next days, then we knew we really had a problem," Judith recalled. She remembered that she had been at work the day her daughter went missing, but had returned home for her afternoon break, which was when she last saw Denise. Judith said, "Before I went back to work that day, I had a gut feeling. Something did not feel right to me." Denise's cream-colored Buick was found empty just half a mile from Route 44, along Tower Road, a gravel lane near a barn east of Glenwood. As Denise had already been reported missing, investigators arrived and realized that her vehicle might hold some clues as to her whereabouts. There were no signs of a struggle, though, and the car was locked. A search at the local area was conducted, but no evidence was found. Denise's parents told detectives that as far as they knew, their daughter had no friends in the area where her car was located. Nobody knew why Denise would be out in this part of the country. There was no indication that she left on her own volition, and the police did not believe that she was a runaway. She was looking forward to university, was an active participant in school sports as well as a straight-A student, and furthermore, took nothing with her when she left home the previous afternoon. She left behind her ID and the carrying case and cleaning solution for her contact lenses. NBC noted that her handbag was returned to her parents by a distant cousin about an hour after Denise left home. But for whatever reason, there was no way to let the 18-year-old know this. Less than a week after Denise went missing, on April 2nd, a 100-acre plot of land in rural Fayette County, where the party had taken place, was combed through both by police and firefighters. 300 acres of land were searched in Glenwood, around where her car was located, but neither search yielded any clues. Meanwhile, Denise's parents took time off work to assist with the investigation. While either parent believed that she had run away, her mother, Judith, noted, "We are not convinced that she ran away, but we hope that's what happened because the alternatives are not good." Adding to the strangeness of an 18-year-old's sudden disappearance is the fact that she had been living a perfectly ordinary life beforehand. There was no change in behavior, no new people in her life, nothing that could lead investigators to a break in the case. Though she had recently broken up with her boyfriend of 3 years, a man named Sean McClum, her parents had noted that at the end of relationship had prompted Denise to become more sociable. The parents split up about 1 month before she vanished. As time passed, investigators struggled to move the case forward. There was simply no indication as to Denise's fate. Nothing had been found that could lead them to her whereabouts or tell them that she was deceased. There were no car keys, no fingerprints, no blood samples. 10 days after she went missing, detectives requested that citizens of Lawrence County, Indiana, keep their eyes and ears open. Though they had no indication that she was in the area, they noted that she had many friends and acquaintances from her various sports activities. A few tips trickled in about possible sightings of the 18-year-old, but none were ever confirmed. Using her address book, detectives spoke with various friends and schoolmates of Denise's. But again, this led nowhere. Nobody had seen her nor heard from her. She hadn't mentioned anything suspicious lately, and her behavior had been completely ordinary. By all accounts, Denise was not the kind of young woman to run away from home. By May, a reward of $10,000 for information leading to her whereabouts was offered, though nobody ever claimed it. Little information came in off the back of this reward, and the investigation quickly dried up. With nothing to work with, detectives were forced to move on to other cases. On August 10, 1988, over 2 years after Denise went missing, her mother Judith received a phone call from a young woman in Norfolk, Virginia. Judith recalled, "Girl said things that sounded too much like our daughter. We felt compelled to drive to Norfolk." The woman claimed to be Denise and had called on Judith's day off, which was information only Denise would know. However, when the family met the woman, she said that she didn't know who they were and denied ever calling them. The woman later confessed that she had in fact called the Flumes and that she had done so because she believed she'd seen Denise at a local shopping center. Of course, none of it was true in the end. Despite it all being a cruel hoax, the Flumes declined to press charges against the woman. Decades passed and no new progress in the case was ever made. Indiana State Police Detective Scott Jarvis stated that while there had been rumors about Denise's fate, there were virtually no solid leads. "There's not one constant theory. There isn't anyone we focused on or any persons of interest," he said. Jarvis also noted that there was pressure to finally solve the case and put it to bed, stating that the more time passed, the harder it was to solve. He stated, "Any time this much time goes by, any potential witnesses could have died or moved on. The longer this goes on, the more rumors that come about." In 2014, Denise's DNA was extracted from a baby tooth and submitted to the National DNA Database System, but no matches were found. Over the years, case evidence was lost or destroyed, meaning modern-day forensic techniques could not be applied, and potential clues were permanently out of reach. With any case this old and lacking any real solid leads, several theories eventually surfaced as locals and online sleuths began to speculate about what had become of 18-year-old Denise Flume. One theory is that Denise had seen something that she shouldn't have when she went to the farm to look for her missing handbag. Another is that while she drove, she ran into an anonymous killer. Perhaps they'd flagged her down or followed her and forced her to pull over. Prison inmates have claimed to know the identity of Denise's abductor and have even bragged that they know the location of her buried body. But these leads have never panned out and Denise remains missing. It's worth noting that there has also been some criticism of the original investigation. The lead detective assigned to the case, a man named Ted McQuinley, was the cousin of Denise's father, and it was observed that his investigation lacked documentation, records, and detailed notes, with much of the inquiry relying heavily upon McQuinley's memory. This may have set newer investigators back, as it's possible that potential leads and witnesses were missing from the case files. In 2018, the Fayette County Sheriff's Department announced that they were taking a fresh look at Denise's case. Using the help of retired detective supervisor Tom Barker, investigators began to retrace old leads, re-examine case files, and re-interview witnesses. Around the same time, the Mary Gray Bird Sanctuary in Connorsville was searched. Cadaver dogs alerted authorities to the possibility of human remains at the fourth pond of the sanctuary. An examination was delayed due to torrential rains, but when the pond was finally searched, nothing was found. The sanctuary had been looked into after investigators received a tip from the former girlfriend of a person of interest in the case. Later that year, in December, Sean McClung, Denise's ex-boyfriend, was interrogated by detectives. In 2017, McClung had taken a voice stress test, an iffy interrogation tool, which is reportedly less accurate than a polygraph test, and authorities noted that he had failed it. McClung is a notable person in Denise's case. Though he was never declared a suspect nor a person of interest, he left town in 1986, shortly after the disappearance. He moved to Arizona and did not participate in searches for Denise. Furthermore, despite their 3-year relationship, he seemed largely unaffected by her disappearance. While in Arizona, McClung gathered a lengthy criminal history of domestic violence. He returned to Connorsville in 2017, where he was subsequently approached by investigators working on Denise's case. Interestingly, he had claimed for years that his ex-girlfriend was still alive. 2 years later, in early 2020, authorities reported that new information had come to light and led them to believe Denise was no longer alive and sadly had died at the hands of another person. They believed her remains had been buried in an undisclosed location in rural Fayette County. Although authorities combed the area and used ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, Denise's remains were not found. In July of 2020, while being held for an unrelated fraud charge, Sean McClung confessed to taking Denise's life back in 1986. He claimed that the 18-year-old had picked him up on March 28, the day that she vanished, and that they had argued. During the argument, McClung killed Denise, though it's unclear how. He then called several friends to help him move the body. McClung admitted his story to the police in exchange for immunity and dismissal of the other 2 unrelated charges. But part of the agreement was that he was not to withhold any information. When he was unable to supply investigators with the location of Denise's body, his immunity was withdrawn, and he was charged with voluntary manslaughter. Unfortunately, however, nothing further ever came from this. At the time of his arrest, McClung was already suffering from an undisclosed terminal illness. He died at the age of 56 on September 26, 2020, all before a trial could take place. Notably, 5 days before his death, McClung recanted his confession, telling his lawyer that he didn't know what happened to Denise and that he'd only confessed to taking her life because he wanted to avoid jail time. Though Denise's parents were devastated that they still had no answers and were unable to bring their daughter home, they conceded that several details in McClung's confession didn't match the facts of the case. They admitted that they had had their reservations about the confession from the beginning, but believed that he knew more than he was letting on. Few updates have come in Denise's case since McClung's death. In the spring of 2021, EquiSearch Midwest, in conjunction with CCRT, Indiana Canine Search and Recover, alongside the Fayette County Sheriff's Department, conducted a search for Denise's remains. The specific areas searched in Fayette County have not been disclosed, and the search carried on for about 12 hours. However, no discoveries were reported. An NBC report from 2020 saw Fayette County Sheriff, Joey Laughlin, state that there were several persons of interest in the case, but simply not enough evidence to charge anyone. He added, "We believe more than one person is involved by statements they've made or by their relationship to Denise." Now in their 70s, Denise's parents are afraid that they might not see justice for their daughter. They are offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to Denise's location and to the arrest of the person or people responsible for her presumed demise. 18-year-old Denise Diane Flume was last seen in Connorsville, Indiana on the afternoon of March 28, 1986. She is described as a white female with brown hair and brown eyes, standing 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing 135 pounds at the time of her disappearance. Denise has pierced ears, wears contact lenses, and was last seen wearing a red Motley Crue t-shirt, size medium, blue striped jeans, size 11, white trainers, size 9, and 2 rings. If you have any information regarding her case, please contact the authorities. One of the rings is gold with a garnet, while the other is a silver-class ring with a red setting. Denise was driving a cream-colored 1981 Buick Regal the day she disappeared, but the vehicle was found in Glenwood, Indiana, one day after she went missing. If you have any information about Denise's disappearance, you can contact the Fayette County Sheriff's Department at 765-825-1110 or the Indiana State Police at 765-778-2121. Moving on to the next case. Catherine Knight. Catherine Knight, an Australian abattoir worker, became notorious for her brutal crime in 2000 when she murdered and mutilated her lover, stabbing him 37 times with a butcher knife. She not only killed him but also dismembered his body, cooked parts of it, and intended to serve them to his children. Born on October 24, 1955, in Tenterfield, Australia, Catherine had a difficult upbringing. She was the result of an affair between her mother, Barbara Ruffin, and her father, Ken Knight. Barbara, who was already a mother of 4 boys from her marriage to Jack Ruffin, had met Ken Knight through her husband. Due to backlash from their local community regarding their scandalous affair, Barbara and Ken decided to move out of town, where they later had additional 4 children, including twin girls born in 1955 in Tenterfield. Catherine Knight was one of these twin girls. Knight was said to have had a chaotic childhood. Her father was a violent alcoholic who would force her mother into having sex multiple times in a day. Knight had once claimed that she was sexually assaulted by several family members until the age of 11, though her father never molested her. Reports indicate that Knight once told her mother that one of her partners wanted her to participate in sexual activities she was uncomfortable with. Barbara responded by telling her to tolerate it and stop complaining. Knight, who attended Musselburgh High School, earned a reputation as a bully, often intimidating smaller children. She had physically assaulted a boy with a weapon and even got into an altercation with a teacher, resulting in an injury when the teacher defended themselves. Knight left school at 15 without learning how to read or write. At that point, Knight got a job at a clothing factory, but 12 months later, she secured what she considered her dream job at a slaughterhouse, where she was responsible for removing the internal organs of Catherine Knight. Took great pride in her work and quickly advanced to the boning section of the local abattoir. She was then provided with her own set of butcher's knives. Wherever Knight lived, she developed the habit of hanging these knives above her bed, presumably for easy access, something that would later prove useful when she needed them to harm her lover. In 1973, Knight met co-worker David Stanford Kellett at the slaughterhouse. He was a heavy drinker who would often get into fights. During his drunken scuffles, Knight would step in and back him up with her fists. In their town, Knight was well known for physically threatening anyone who upset her. David Kellett soon realized that Knight was capable of doing more than a little damage with her fists. Before long, Kellett found himself under Knight's control. In 1974, he was compelled to marry her. The couple arrived at the wedding on her motorcycle, with Kellett visibly intoxicated. Upon their arrival, Barbara, Knight's mother, took Kellett aside and warned him about her daughter's volatile temper. She told him that Knight had a screw loose and cautioned him to be careful around her, even going so far as to suggest that Knight could potentially kill him. On their wedding night, Knight had tried to strangle Kellett because he fell asleep from exhaustion after consummating their marriage 3 times. Knight, who wanted more rounds of sex, wasn't too pleased with her husband, hence her decision to kill him in his sleep. Luckily, Kellett woke up and succeeded in fighting off Knight. Although she had tried to kill him only 1 day into their marriage, the union lasted for 10 more years. The marriage, however, became extremely toxic. Due to pressure, constant physical abuse, and no peace of mind, Kellett became unfaithful and had once left his wife and their 2 daughters in the middle of the night. On discovering Kellett's unfaithfulness, placed their 2-month-old baby on the railway line shortly before a train was due. However, the baby was spared when a homeless man spotted the baby and rescued her minutes the train would pass. That same day, Knight had also threatened several people with a stolen axe. She was arrested and taken to St. Elmo's Hospital, where she was initially diagnosed with postnatal depression, after witnesses saw her violently throwing and pushing her second child in a stroller down a busy street. Catherine recovered and signed herself out the following day. After physically assaulting and threatening to kill those, she demanded to take her to Queensland, where Colette, her husband, was. The police apprehended and admitted her to the Mariset Psychiatric Hospital, where she told nurses that she intended to kill the mechanic who had repaired Colette's car because that made it possible for him to leave her. She had also mentioned killing Colette and his mother once she gets to Queensland. The police informed Colette, but, despite the threat, Colette took Knight back when she was released from the hospital. Nonetheless, their reunion didn't last long, as they both went their separate ways in 1984. After too much toxicity in the marriage. Shortly after her breakup with Colette, met 38-year-old minor David Saunders in 1986. A few months later, Saunders moved in with Knight and her 2 daughters. However, he kept his own apartment in Scone. Knight became suspicious and jealous about what he did when she wasn't around and would often throw him outside her house. Saunders would then go back to his apartment, where Knight would often go to beg him to come back. Bottom line is, just like her past relationships, this one also quickly grew toxic and violent. In May 1987, Knight cut the throat of Saunders' 2-month-old puppy in front of him, just to show him what she was capable of if he ever thought of cheating or leaving her. She then knocked him out with a fry pan to further drive home her point. Regardless of all these, they still stayed together and even had a daughter, Sarah. In 1988, this made Saunders to put a deposit on a house. Knight then paid in full when her workers' bonus came through in 1989. She decorated the whole house with animal skins, skulls, horns, rusty animal traps, leather jackets, old boots, machetes, rakes, and pitchforks. Every portion of the house was covered with her invented decorations. Saunders moved back to Scone after Knight hit him in the face with an iron and had attempted to kill him with a pair of scissors. Later, when he returned, he found out that she had cut up all his clothes. Saunders, who was scared for his life, then took a long service leave and went into hiding. Knight did all she could to find him, but no one admitted to knowing his whereabouts. Some months later, Saunders returned to see his daughter, only to find out that Knight had gone to the police and unjustly told them that she was afraid of him. They had issued her an apprehended violence order against him. In 1991, Knight met 43-year-old former abattoir co-worker named John Chillingworth. The couple stayed together for 3 years and had a child called Eric. Eric was Knight's first son. No violent incidents were reported about their relationship, but it ended after Knight left Chillingworth for a man she was having an affair with, John Charles Thomas Price. Catherine Knight and John Price's relationship began with no complications. John Price, whose marriage had ended in 1988, had 3 children. While the last-born, who was 2 years old, remained with his former wife, the 2 older children lived with him and seemed to like Knight when she moved in with them in 1995. John Price made enough money as a minor to keep Knight comfortable. However, in 1998, when she suggested they marry and he refused, she turned violent. She then videotaped items Price had allegedly stolen from his workplace and sent it to his boss. This action got Price fired. He initially kicked Knight out, but a few months later, they started seeing each other again. However, this time he refused to let her move back in with him. According to their friends and neighbors, Knight's violence then began to get out of hand. Due to this, Price's friends decided to cut all ties with him as long as he stayed with Knight. In February of 2000, an argument between John Charles Thomas Price and Knight ensued, such that Price had been assaulted multiple times, with Knight attempting to stab him in the chest. Finally fed up, he kicked her out of his house, and on the February 29th, he stopped at the Scone Magistrates Court on his way to work and took out a restraining order against her in an attempt to keep him and his children safe. That afternoon, discussed his concerns for his safety and told his coworkers that if he ever went missing, it was because Knight had murdered him. They pleaded with him not to go home, but he insisted, saying he was afraid Knight might hurt his children and he needed to protect them. On getting home from work, Knight was not around, and she had sent his children for a sleepover at a friend's house. Price then followed his usual routine of checking in with the neighbors before going to bed at 11 p.m. Shortly after, came home and made herself dinner, watched TV for a few minutes, showered, and went into Price's room. She woke him up and both of them had sex, and he went back to bed. Catherine Knight then decided it was time to bring out her butcher knife, close to her bed, where she had always kept them. According to reports, she stabbed Price 37 times, and evidence had it that he had woken up during the attack but could not fight her off. He later died from his stabbed wounds. Knight then skinned him and hung his body from a meat hook in the sitting room. She further decapitated him and cut up pieces of his body to cook in a dish with potato, pumpkin, beets, zucchini, cabbage, squash, and gravy. She made a dish for herself using Price's flesh. However, the half-discarded content later found that the crime scene suggested that she couldn't finish her meal. After taking a large amount of pills, Knight lay down next to the headless, mutilated body of Price and subsequently passed out. The next morning, Price's co-workers heeded his warning and called the police after he didn't show up at work. The police arrived at the gruesome murder scene to find the comatose Catherine Knight, who was quickly detained. When she woke up, she claimed to have no memory of what had happened the previous night. According to reports, when the police entered the kitchen, they found Price's head boiling in a pot of vegetables on the stove. On the table, they found 2 full plates of Knight despicable meal, each labeled with a name. It was later realized that Knight had planned to serve John Price's body parts to his children. She was arraigned on the March 2, 2001 on the charge of murdering Price, to which she entered a plea of not guilty. Her trial, which was initially fixed for July 23, 2001, was later adjourned due to her counsel's illness. Her trial then commenced in October, but it didn't get very far. Changed her plea to guilty, and the judge adjourned the case without testimony. On the November 8, 2001, Justice O'Keefe pointed out that the nature of the crime and Knight's lack of remorse required a severe penalty. He sentenced her to life imprisonment, refused to fix a non-parole period, and ordered that her papers be marked never to be released. That was the first time in history a woman in Australia was given a life sentence without parole. Till today, still maintains her innocence and refuses to accept responsibility for her actions. She had once appealed her life sentence before in June 2006 and was denied almost immediately. Catherine Knight remains incarcerated at Silverwater Women's Correctional Center, where she earns approximately $70 a week assembling airline headsets. Reports suggest that she receives very few visits from friends or family members. Some sources indicate that has found religion and now assists other women in resolving their differences. According to certain reports, the murder of John Price was premeditated, with Knight planning the crime in advance. Catherine Knight once told one of her children that she wanted to kill her partner, Price. The motive for this claim remains unclear, though she accused Price of being a rapist and child molester. However, this allegation was proven to be false and could not be substantiated in court. The crime scene, which was gruesome and disturbing, had such a traumatic effect on the investigators that many of them sought counseling to cope with what they had witnessed. Colin Howell, a well-regarded dentist and preacher in his religious community in Northern Ireland, appeared to have the perfect life. He had a wife, Leslie, with whom he had 3 children, and the couple was expecting another. To outsiders, their life seemed idyllic. However, the facade began to crumble when a member of the congregation noticed Howell in a secret affair with Hazel Buchanan, a Sunday school teacher. Hazel's husband, Trevor, was a respected police officer in the community, adding further complexity and tension to the already scandalous situation. The affair between Colin Howell and Hazel Buchanan became increasingly intense, with the 2 meeting in secret locations, including on Colin's dental chair. When their secret was uncovered by the church, both were urged to confess to their respective partners. Despite the devastating revelation, Colin's wife, Leslie, and Hazel's husband, Trevor, were guided by their faith to forgive their spouses, believing that the affair would end. However, the relationship between Colin and Hazel only grew more passionate, and rumors began to spread throughout the town. In May of 1991, a car was discovered in a garage with the engine running, pumping fumes into the cabin. The garage belonged to the father of Leslie, Colin Howell's wife. Inside the car, Leslie was slumped over in the back seat, clutching photographs of her children, and wearing headphones with religious music playing. In the front seat was Hazel's husband, Trevor, dead from exhaust fumes according to the autopsy report. Police concluded that Leslie and Trevor had made a suicide pact after discovering their partner's secret affairs. Shortly after the funerals, Colin and Hazel openly became a couple. After only 5 years of marriage, Colin Howell and his wife Leslie separated. The affair with Hazel Buchanan had left a lasting mark. But Colin managed to recover his reputation over the years. By 1998, his dentistry practice was thriving and he was living in a mansion complete with its own lake. Colin had remarried to Kyle, a woman he had met during Bible studies. Kyle, drawn to his charm and biblical knowledge, agreed to marry him after just 5 months. His life appeared to be back on track, but the darker chapters of his past were far from closed. One day, while Colin's wife Kyle fed their 7-month-old son, Colin sat opposite to her and made the shocking confession. Not only had he been unfaithful to his first wife, but he had also murdered her and the husband of his mistress and placed their bodies to make it look like a double suicide. Kyle pleaded with him to go to the police and promised that she would stand by him and visit him in prison. She convinced him to make a public confession that would take place with both their families and the church elders. Colin made a reservation at the Bundale Hotel in Newcastle, Colorado, where he planned to make his confession, which Kyle believed would end in an arrest and incarceration. However, when Colin's father called and told him that he couldn't make it to the soiree, Colin took that as a sign from God that he should not reveal his secret. That Sunday, he went to church and claimed a girl delivered him a message. She said, quote, "Colin, I just don't know why I am telling you this, but your sins are forgiven and forgotten by God." From this moment on, whenever Kyle demanded he confess, Colin would threaten to kill himself. She kept his secret for the sake of their children for over 10 more years. They also had another 4 children in this time, but as the years went by, more and more disturbing confessions emerged. First, he would admit that he was addicted to pornography. Later, he admitted to Kyle that he had been sexually abusing women under heavy sedation at his dentistry practice. Finally, in 2008, he sold his share of 2 dental practices while facing a mounting tax bill. He used the money to invest in a scam which offered £8 million to attempt to recover gold from caves in the Philippines, gold that was supposedly left by Japanese troops in World War II. Colin planned to give some of his profits to the church and used the rest to retire in Florida. He soon realized, though, that he had been conned. He later claimed it was at this moment which made him decide to confess. He said, quote, "You'll never be a free person unless you confess and be really honest." Kyle urged him again and again. 18 years after the covered-up murder, Colin confessed to church elders and then to the police. Colin, who the media then dubbed the Driller Killer because of his dentistry practice, was charged with murder alongside his previous partner, Hazel. Colin confessed that since divorce was outlawed by the church, he made another plan to be with his mistress. While his wife had been asleep, he put a hosepipe emitting fumes from his car into her mouth. He covered her face with a quilt when she woke up and held it there until she died. He then dressed her corpse, threw her in the trunk, and drove to the home of Hazel and Trevor. Hazel let him in where Trevor was passed out. She had crushed up pills and put them in his food. Trevor woke as Colin forced the same hose into his mouth, but Colin prevailed and Trevor quickly died. Colin and Hazel then set the suicide scene in Leslie's dad's garage. Colin pleaded guilty to murder. He gave the court the sordid details of his affair with Hazel. They met at a pool while their children attended the same swimming lesson. Hazel soon became a patient at Colin's dentistry. At one point, she had a secret abortion in London after becoming pregnant with his baby. He confessed that he drugged Hazel while testing the dosage for the murders. While she was unconscious in the dentist's chair, he would copulate with her. Colin was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 21 years. A little later, he was sentenced to another 5.5 years for assaulting female patients while they were sedated at his dentistry practice. Hazel denied the guilty charges. pleading that she was also a victim to Colin's sexual depravity. She claimed she was terrified of him and lured into his evil web. Hazel told police during interviews he was very controlling. Maybe I was easy prey, and that's how I look back on it and see that. He was a very calculating person, a very clever guy. I'm not very bright, unfortunately, but he was a step ahead of me the whole time. I was scared. I thought if I say something against this, he'll kill me. Hazel sobbed as a jury of 9 men and 3 women refused to believe her and found her guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years. The confessions rocked the community as they were faced with the hypocrisy of a highly respected professional's religious values and the depravity of these gruesome acts. While friends and family are now relieved that a painful chapter in their lives has been closed. No act of justice or years behind bars can bring back Leslie, a mother to 4 children now practically parentless, nor Trevor, a beloved father of 2. Kyle, Colin's second wife, was tormented by the web of lies that her husband had spun over the years. For over a decade, she was forced to hide the truth behind his horrific actions. Eventually, Kyle could no longer keep the facade up and spoke out, telling the press. Everyone thought he was this great Christian guy, but they were so wrong. He was a monster. The truth, long buried, began to unravel, revealing the dark side of a man who had fooled so many with his charm and devout image. Moving on to the next case. Byrne family tragedy struck the Byrne family on February 13, 2016, when emergency services in the small village of the Dambagh, Essex, England, were called to a devastating incident at the family home. Darren Byrne, a 40-year-old father of 2, returned from walking the family dog to find his 35-year-old wife, Maria, dead in the kitchen. She had been preparing a bacon sandwich for him when something went horribly wrong, and it appeared she had been consumed by flames, likely burning to death before Darren's return. Initially, it seemed like tragic accident. However, a post-mortem examination revealed that Maria's clothes were soaked in white spirit, also known as mineral spirits in the U.S., a highly flammable paint thinner and accelerant. This discovery led authorities to suspect foul play, and a murder investigation was launched. In the weeks that followed, Darren Byrne's story began to unravel as the horrifying truth began to surface. Maria Byrne's death was anything but a tragic accident. As investigators pieced together the facts, they discovered that Darren Byrne had been engaging in a long-term extramarital affair with his osteopath, an affair that Maria had discovered. Darren Byrne insisted that he would end things with the other women, and the couple seemed to be patching things up, even planning a trip to the United States from their Essex town for Darren's upcoming birthday. Everything came crashing down, however, on the day of Maria's death because she found her husband's secret prepaid phone which contained text messages which proved the affair was anything but over. Despite Maria's best efforts to save their marriage, her husband had continued to destroy their family for his own pleasure. Furious at her husband's brazen lies and infidelity, Maria confronted him in the kitchen while their 2 boys, Harry and Oliver, were spending the weekend with her parents. The verbal confrontation became physical when Darren Byrne bludgeoned Maria with enough force to knock her out. The sheer brutality of this assault should have been enough to break through whatever rage had engulfed Darren Byrne and led him to immediately seek emergency medical services for his unconscious wife. Instead, Darren Byrne displayed pure evil no one who knew him could have ever predicted. With his wife now unconscious on the kitchen floor, Darren Byrne retrieved a bottle of paint thinner and doused the mother of his children in the flammable liquid. He proceeded to light his wife on fire and turn on the gas stove, hoping to spark an explosion or burn the whole house down and escape responsibility for this cold-blooded murder. After prepping their family home to burn down, Darren nonchalantly took their dog on a long walk through the surrounding area. CCTV footage captured Darren Byrne's attempt at an alibi while his wife burned to death in their kitchen. About an hour and a half after leaving, Darren Byrne returned to the scene of the crime, hoping that Maria's death would look like the result of a gas leak or another accidental explosion. The house had, to Darren's dismay, remained standing, so he quickly moved Maria's body from the middle of the kitchen to directly next to the stove. Then, faking all the anguish and horror he could muster, he called 999 for local UK emergency services. He said, quote, "My wife is dead. She is dead. She is burned badly." Maria's mother, Linda, recalls a refusal by the family to even begin to question any involvement Darren may have had in their daughter's death. Darren even stayed overnight with Maria's family and his sons after being released from questioning by police, insisting he could never have contributed to Maria's accidental death. Despite Maria's family being willing to take his word for this, Linda was aware of Darren's affair and Maria's attempts to save the collapsing marriage despite Darren's actions. Maria had also confided before her death that Darren's behavior had been turning more emotionally manipulative and controlling, though she assured her mother that Darren would never harm her physically. The day after Darren was released from questioning, police arrived at Linda's home and arrested him in light of the suspicious facts surrounding Maria's death. After a 3-week trial in November of 2016, Darren Byrne was found guilty of murder and arson charges by jury verdict in the Chelmsford Crown Court and sentenced to a minimum of 24 years to life. The unbelievable evil displayed by Darren Byrne on February 13, 2016 extends far past the impact of Maria's parents losing their daughter. Harry and Oliver, just 6 and 4 years old, will now have to grow up without their mother or father, and one day, they will learn the horrifying truth about their father's role in Maria's death. At the time of Darren's arrest, the young boys were told that their mother had been in a tragic accident, and that their father was helping the police with the investigation. The psychological impact of the truth on Harry and Oliver will undoubtedly be profound, offering a glimpse into the devastating consequences of Darren Byrne's actions. While justice has been served through the legal process, it cannot undo the unimaginable loss of a cherished mother and wife, taken from the world far too soon. Moving on to the next case. Cheryl Monique Taylor. 23-year-old Cheryl Monique Taylor lived in Weldon, North Carolina, in 2002. She was married to her high school sweetheart, John Osby, and they had a 7-year-old daughter named Justice. On the morning of August 16, 2002, Justice woke up and realized that her mom had not woken her up in time for the school bus, causing her to miss it. When Justice went to her mom's bedroom, she made the horrifying discovery that someone had taken Cheryl's life. An autopsy revealed that Cheryl had been strangled and likely assaulted. It was not publicly disclosed whether there were signs of forced entry or if forensic evidence from the crime scene was collected that could link to the perpetrator. Despite a thorough investigation, no arrests were made and the case went cold. Justice and John continued to grieve for 17 more years. Then, in December 2019, there was a break in the case. After going missing, John Osby was found fatally shot and rolled up in a blanket near Sycamore Street in Weldon. Investigators struggled to identify the person responsible for shooting him. For years, the family was left wondering if they would ever find answers about what happened to John and Cheryl Taylor. That changed in January 2023. When Sheriff Tyree Davis hired Detective Sergeant Samoji as Halifax County's dedicated cold case investigator. His role was to review the office's unsolved cold cases, searching for overlooked clues and using new technology to uncover leads that had previously been out of reach. Detective Samoji first looked into John Osby's case before realizing Cheryl's life had been taken by someone years earlier. He identified the person responsible for what happened to Cheryl. Finally, on July 21, 2023, 46-year-old Lewis Turner Jr. was arrested and charged with taking Cheryl Taylor's life. He was living in Northampton County, North Carolina. It is not known yet if he is responsible for shooting John Osby. It was revealed that Turner was a friend of Cheryl and her family back in 2002 when he took her life. Turner was 25 years old when the crime took place. He has 2 other criminal charges on his record, assaults from when he was a teen. In both those cases, he got probation. After being arrested and charged with voluntary manslaughter, Turner was held at the Halifax County Jail under $250,000 bond. Scott Hall, patrol captain of the Halifax County Sheriff's Office, outlined the reasoning behind the voluntary manslaughter charge. This was not a premeditated crime with malice. Based on the facts of the case and elements of the crime, we charged accordingly. Sheriff Tyree Davis remarked how he cried tears of joy at being able to arrest a suspect in connection with Cheryl's case. I received the call that we were able to solve one of our cold cases. a cold case from over 20 years ago. No one knew about this information, and we could not say anything until we notified the family first. However, I was instantly overcome with emotion and tears started to flow. As a member of the State Commission, I was sitting up front with the other board members and I tried to hold things together. I did so just by wiping the tears away, but once I started sniffling, I knew I needed to leave the room. Folks, I can tell you that these tears were tears of joy. These were tears of excitement. Excitement not only for Ms. Taylor's family, but also excitement for her friends, co-workers, schoolmates, and anyone that she has ever crossed paths with. I was excited for the community because this is a beacon of hope for all those families that need closure too, he added. Cheryl's daughter, Justice Osby, had this to say after the arrest. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. We never knew this day was coming, Justice said, expressing her gratitude to everyone who helped bring Turner to justice. She shared her relief, saying, "I'm just so thankful for everyone that participated and helped me get closure for my family, because today is a good day." Moving on to the next case. Austin Harouf's actions would later shock the community, with reports describing him as a typical college student who, on the surface, appeared to have a bright future ahead of him. However, in 2016, Harouf committed a gruesome double murder. His victims were John Stevens and Michelle Mishkin, a couple who lived in a home in Tequesta, Florida. Harouf was allegedly found chewing on Stevens' face before being restrained by neighbors. His actions left many wondering what had caused him to snap, leading to questions about his mental state and whether he was under the influence of substances at the time. Austin Harouf's YouTube channel revealed a mix of seemingly random and unsettling content, including videos of him singing Elvis Presley's Hound Dog and discussing bodybuilding topics like his experiences with personal trainers and steroids. His recruiting profile highlighted his physical attributes, standing 6 feet tall, weighing 200 pounds, and able to bench press 365 pounds in high school, indicating a strong interest in bodybuilding. One of the more bizarre videos on his channel featured him discussing chest exercises in a disjointed manner, even crying toward the end. These videos, along with his erratic behavior, raised concerns about his mental state long before the tragic events of 2016. On the evening of August 15 in 2016, 19-year-old Austin Harouf stormed out of Duffy's Bar and Grill in Jupiter during a meal with his family, leaving without explanation. He then walked 2 miles to his mother's house, where his behavior grew increasingly erratic. Harouf attempted to drink cooking oil and, when stopped by his mother, poured it into a bowl with Parmesan cheese and ate it. His mother, concerned, took him back to the restaurant, where he had an argument with his father. According to psychologist Phil McInnes, his father grabbed him and, in frustration, asked, "What is wrong with you?" He further said his son raised his fist at him, but Wade, Harouf's girlfriend, told him to stop and he left. While Harouf was walking across town, he came upon Stevens and Mishkin's Tequesta home, just north of the Palm Beach County line. He is accused of killing the couple there in their garage with a knife and a hammer. He made use of different tools he found in the couple's garage to attack and to inflict wounds on the couple. According to a police complaint, a neighbor named Jeff Fisher stepped in after hearing the noise outside. Fisher apparently was stabbed with a knife by Harouf as well, but he survived. Upon their arrival, deputies from the Martin County Sheriff's Office discovered a nearly naked Harouf eating off Stevens' face and grunting like an animal. According to reports, yanking off Harouf from Stevens' body was a hard task. He was described as stiff. It took a taser, 3 police officers, and AK-9 to pull Harouf from Stevens' body. When he was eventually tamed, Harouf was said to have told the police to shoot him that he deserved to die. During the attack, Harouf reportedly drank deadly chemical he found in the couple's garage, which almost damaged his digestive system. The restaurant security video shows Austin Harouf calmly exiting about 45 minutes before the attack. Prior to the attack, Harouf had been acting erratically. His mother Mina reportedly called the police and said that her son had been acting abnormally few minutes to the attack, but it was too late. She said he claimed there were demons in her house and that he had superpowers and was here to protect people. Sadly, his superpowers could not protect Stephen and his wife, Mishkin. Hiref believed he was half dog and half man, according to Resnick's report. During his interview with his psychologist, Austin Hiref told Dr. Phil he was escaping a demon he called Daniel and only had vague recollections of the murder. He said he could only remember being yelled at by Mishkin when he entered the couple's garage. He said he grabbed a machete but does not remember why he killed her and her husband. In his words he said, "It's like it happened, but he wasn't aware of it." Hiref's victims, Michigan, aged 53, and Stevens, aged 59, resided in a house surrounded by vast golf courses close to the banks of the Loxahatchee River in the Jupiter area. The pair reportedly spent many evenings unwinding and hosting visitors in their garage, where they'd set up a television and chairs. The two met in 1997 at a financial firm in Miami where they both worked. They had just recently celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. According to news reports, Miskin was a financial professional in Boca Raton and the daughter of former North Miami Beach Mayor Jeff Miskin, and Stevens was a retired owner of the landscaping company Green Smart Lawn and Garden. A Martin County sheriff informed reporters that the killings of Michigan and Stevens may have definitely been motivated by the synthetic drug, bath salts, or flakku. However, toxicology findings eventually disproved his assertion. It was said that only alcohol and traces of marijuana were found in Hiref's system. Investigators found that he purchased some hallucinogenic mushrooms a few days before the attack, but his friends said he had destroyed them and no trace was found in his blood. Before the purchase, Hiref was seen asking a very disturbing question such as, "How much will it take me to trip but not too bad?" Hiref also did Google searches for how to know if you are going crazy, hearing things in my sleep, an exploding head syndrome overview and facts. Hiref attacks made national headlines because of its brutality and randomness. He did not know the victims. He was a 19-year-old with no criminal records, a former high school footballer and a wrestler who was studying exercise science. Hiref was charged with 2 counts of 38-page report by forensic psychologist. Hiref was found to have been suffering from severe mental disease, specifically bipolar disorder and acute manic episodes with psychotic features, as well as clinical lycanthropy delusions, also known as werewolf syndrome. Austin Hiref pleaded not guilty reason of insanity to the 2 counts of first-degree murder and other charges for his August 2016 murder of John Stevens and his wife, Michigan Stevens. A judge has found him not guilty by reason of insanity. On November 28, in 2022, Circuit Judge Sherwood Bauer accepted an agreement between Hiref's defense team and state prosecutors to avert trial, sending Hiref to a mental health facility as opposed to prison. At the hearing, Stevens and Michigan's family members could be seen tearful in the audience as the judge explained his ruling. Several of them gave victim impact statements. The case of Austin Hiref raises significant questions about mental health, substance abuse, and criminal responsibility. His behavior before the attack, including eating cooking oil and displaying erratic actions, suggests there might have been an underlying mental health issue or substance use involved. Some argue that Hiref may have been under the influence of drugs, while others believe that he could have been suffering from a mental health disorder, which might explain his violent actions. Whether Hiref was truly insane at the time of the murders is a matter for legal experts and mental health professionals to determine. His ongoing treatment at a secure mental health facility indicates that his mental health status is being taken seriously. The question of whether he was influenced by drugs or was experiencing a mental breakdown remains a point of debate. Dark Canyon Elaine Park, born on September 24, 1996, was 20 years old when she went missing. A lover of musical theater and a dedicated member of various dance companies, she was also an aspiring actress. Her case, along with those of Mitrice Richardson, 24, Tristan Bowdett, 35, and Matthew Weaver Jr., 21, has left the community of Malibu, California, searching for answers. These cases are connected by the area known as Dark Canyon, which has seen a surprising number of disappearances and murders over the last decade. Despite the passage of time, the families of these victims continue to seek justice and closure. Elaine Park, credited as an extra in popular TV shows such as ER, Mad TV, Desperate Housewives, Crazy, Stupid, love, and role models, had a diverse range of interests. She attended Pierce College in Los Angeles but dropped out to pursue a full-time career. An aspiring rapper, Elaine also expressed herself through spoken-word poetry about her life. Despite her talents and accomplishments, Elaine's childhood was marked by a lack of unconditional love, especially after her parents' divorce. Her father even offered to sign away his parental rights and sever ties with his children, a gesture that deeply impacted her and her siblings. Although Elaine's father never officially severed his parental rights, he was not an active presence in her life. Elaine lived with her mother, relying on her financially, but their relationship was reportedly strained. Neighbors often heard arguments late into the night, suggesting ongoing tension. The last confirmed sighting of Elaine Park was during the early hours of January 28, 2017, according to various witnesses and digital records. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Of Korean descent, she had brown hair and wide brown eyes that were usually meticulously lined with eyeliner. She was 5 feet 6 inches and roughly 125 pounds and was last seen wearing a white sweatshirt or possibly a hoodie and denim shorts or possibly gray sweatpants. Those close to her recall that she often wore a necklace which had an E on it. Elaine's mother, like the parents of the other children lost to the canyon's dark secrets, was at the forefront of the search for her child and was the one who initially agreed to work with journalist Neil Strauss in hopes of raising more money for the search for her daughter. However, in a surprising twist, the investigation into Elaine's disappearance began to shift focus, revealing numerous inconsistencies in the narrative and alibi provided by the person who initially reported her missing, Elaine's own mother, Susan Park. Despite Susan's earlier efforts, working alongside investigative journalist Neil Strauss and his team to find her daughter, recent digital evidence has cast a shadow of suspicion on her involvement, complicating the case and raising new questions about her role in Elaine's disappearance. It was no secret that the mother-daughter relationship was not close. Neighbors recall that they often heard fighting between the two, often late into the night. Elaine's friend Daisy, with whom she lived for a period, says of the relationship between Elaine and her mother, quote, "They just didn't, I feel like, care enough, which is sad. Her mom would kick her out a lot. Elaine didn't have keys sometimes because her mom would lock her out, literally change the locks." Elaine's mother, Susan, had blamed her daughter for the strain in their relationship, particularly regarding the separation from her father. Sadie, a close friend of Elaine, revealed that Elaine's mother was reportedly very controlling, especially when it came to money. This extended to both the earnings Elaine made as an extra in film and television and a contentious insurance payout, a significant point of tension in their relationship, as shown in their recovered text messages. Although Elaine's phone should have contained crucial messages between her and her mother leading up to her disappearance, Susan claimed she accidentally activated the auto-delete function on the phone when it was returned to her by the police. Despite being advised by private investigator Jaden Brandt to stop repeatedly entering the wrong password, which could lead to the deletion of all data, Susan ignored the warning. While much information was lost, Jaden Brandt, who took on Elaine's case pro bono, was able to recover the most recent iCloud sync, and the text messages and emails he uncovered painted a troubling picture of Elaine's relationship with her mother. Whereas initially the private investigator was only able to recover a limited amount of data from Elaine's phone and computer when a larger capacity MacBook with a larger drive was provided by Neil Strauss, all of a sudden more text messages began to populate and a very grim and morbid picture began to take formation. In the messages between her and her mother, Elaine's responses were always conciliatory. She was definitely the more passive of the two. Elaine's friend, Sadie, recalls that prior to her disappearance, Elaine's mother and her argued about a contentiously soon-to-be-acquired insurance payout and how it would be divided. This insurance payment would become the center of controversy when it was discovered that Elaine's mother received the payment on her daughter's behalf 53 days after Elaine went missing, with Elaine's signature being forged on the payout document. In 2016, Elaine and her friend, Sadie, who was the driver, had gotten into a car accident. Elaine heroically pulled at the car window's broken glass with her bare hands in order to get the trapped occupants of the other party's car. While her hands were bloodied and cut from this act of good Samaritanship, her body nor her back was actually injured, which is in direct opposition to what she told the insurance company in the ensuing days. Sadie theorizes that it was Elaine's mother who encouraged her to file this claim. Prior to the accident, Elaine loved attending hip-hop concerts, and her injuries did not prevent her from attending the myriad of shows in the ensuing months after the accident. In regards to the impending insurance payout, Elaine emailed her mother in June 2016, "Once it arrives, it better be either linked directly to my checking account or if it's a physical check, directly in my hands, the full amount. I'm gonna call the office and make sure you're not pulling any snake shit either." In July 2016, 1 month after this initial email, after an argument between her and her daughter in regards to Elaine going out to eat before seeing the chiropractor who would help bolster the insurance claim's validity, Elaine's mom texted her daughter the word "die" 8 times. On Thursday, January 26, 2017, roughly 2 days prior to her going missing at around 3:30 a.m., texted her mom a pin of her car's location. She was stranded on a bridge, her car having run out of gas, and while she was waiting for help her car battery had died as well. Her mother, along with her boyfriend, Jeff, drove out to assist Elaine in jumping her car and getting her gas. Jeff and Susan, Elaine's mother, claimed that after they successfully got Elaine back home, she passed out on the couch. Her mom claims that Elaine was very skimpily dressed in a lingerie type of getup. Elaine's mother claims that when she and Jeff walked into the living room, Elaine shrieked in surprise and ran to her bedroom. Elaine's mom says that this was the last time she ever physically saw Elaine. Susan then says that she and her boyfriend, Jeff, left the house, and when they returned, they recalled that Elaine was still in her room, though they do not recall seeing or speaking with her. This is the last time her mom and Jeff say they ever physically knew Elaine to be in the home. This was 1 day prior to Elaine's last text communication with Susan, as backed up by Verizon's phone records. On Friday, January 27, 2017, the last day of communication between Elaine and Susan entailed Susan texting Elaine $20 using the quick pay feature of Apple, and Elaine texting back that she'll return her mother the money by 6 p.m. that night. When she still hadn't received the $20 by 7 o'clock that evening, her mom texted Elaine to ask why she hadn't paid her back the money. Elaine, in what would be her last text communication between her and her mother digitally that investigators know of, replies to her mother's text from 2 hours prior stating, "Give me until later tonight." On January 27th, Elaine went to the movies with her on-again off-again boyfriend, Divine Compare, known by his friends as DIVE. The film was called The Return of Xander Cage and was playing at the AMC Promenade at 10:45 p.m. The pair Ubered there and back, returning to DIVE's affluent family's property at around 1 a.m. In the early morning of January 28th, this is confirmed via surveillance footage from the outside of their home. Less than 5 hours after arriving home from the movies, her boyfriend recalls that, for unknown reasons, woke up in a panic, visibly shaking. She then hastily left. Elaine exits her boyfriend's guest house at around 6 o'clock and 1 second a.m., but the video is cut off at 6 o'clock and 5 seconds a.m. just prior to Elaine actually getting into her car. However, a license plate reader on the Compare property verifies that Elaine's Honda Civic did in fact exit the gated community a few minutes later. Some critics point out that it was never clear who was actually driving the car when it exited the Compare property, as the only artifact for that is the license plate reader recording and not the actual CCTV footage, due to an unfortunate twist of digital fate. The reason investigators do not have the critical footage of Elaine leaving is because before the CCTV could tell police what happened next, the footage cut out. There was a significant mishap involving the police when they attempted to transfer footage from a camera unit to one of their storage devices. This act, which is routine for law enforcement, led to the permanent loss of the footage. Some have criticized the police department for the untrained handling of such a simple procedure, particularly given their ample funding. On January 29th, 1 day after Elaine left his home in a hurry, Elaine's boyfriend, DIV, made a controversial Twitter post. He retweeted a post that read, "If a girl leaves some shit at my crib, it's getting thrown out immediately." Initially, suspicion fell on DIV due to the tumultuous nature of his relationship with Elaine. However, there was no evidence, either digital or otherwise, to suggest that he had any further contact with her after her abrupt departure on the morning of January 28th. The Compare family, who were involved in the case, have been cooperative and forthcoming with investigators since Elaine's disappearance. At 10:41 a.m. on that day, Saturday 27th, Susan texts Elaine what she says was a reminder. All records have been deleted, so there is no proof as to what exactly was in the text messages. Susan said that because she didn't receive a response, she called Elaine's phone and says that the phone went to voicemail after 2 rings. Susan then texts Elaine again, although records are lost as to what the text messages specifically contained. However, Susan says she was texting again about the $20. With no response, Susan said she checked Elaine's room and that she noticed Elaine's normal overnight back was gone, and that her makeup was also gone. Susan then said that she emailed and tried to contact her via Facebook to no avail. In another interview, Susan mentions that Elaine would often leave for nights on end without contact. So Susan claims that why she was immediately concerned is focused more around Elaine's lack of paying the money back then on Elaine's physical disappearance from the home. Susan Park in an interview says she didn't come home that night. I remember. I stayed home that night. She didn't come home the next morning. Oh wait, was I home? I don't remember. The next day, Sunday, January 29th, Susan decides she wants to file a missing persons report because she says Elaine would have paid her back the $20 and the fact that she hasn't has worried her. On February 1st, after filing a missing persons report, Susan supposedly wrote the following message on the whiteboard on Elaine's room door. Elaine, as soon as you decide to come home and you are home, please let me know at your earliest. I am so worried. I do love you, Mom. This was dated February 1st, 2017. In regards to Susan's whereabouts on Friday night and into Saturday morning, Susan's timeline and alibi are varied. She first claimed she wasn't home but later said the following in regards to the aftermath of Elaine's car running out of gas and her and Jeff having to rescue her prior to her going missing. So because that incident Friday night, Saturday night, middle of the night, I came home. I even told Jeff, I said, I'm worried because she's having car problems. I need to go home. I think I did that consecutively, maybe like 2:30 or 2 o'clock or something, or 3 o'clock sometime. As I remember, there was no trace of Elaine. There was no trace. When in Marie, wife to Mai, who's the guitarist for the band in Capus and a major researcher and amateur investigator in the case. Alongside Ingrid, Neil Strauss then wife questioned Susan on why she would want to be at home when she would have needed Jeff's help with any potential car troubles that may arise, and Susan had no answer. And Marie asked Susan if she was indeed worried about potential car troubles with Elaine, why she would have insisted on coming home in the middle of the night. To that, Susan replied, yeah, I just wanted to be home with I don't know. Like if you put it that way, I don't have an answer. On February 2nd, 5 days after Elaine was last seen on her boyfriend's home security footage, her car was found, seemingly parked and abandoned, although whether by choice or by force, it is unknown. Elaine's 2015 charcoal gray Honda Civic was found at Coral Beach in Malibu, parked on the shoulder of the 26,000 block of the Pacific Coast Highway. The car's doors were unlocked and the keys were still in the ignition turned into the on position. The car's battery was dead. Elaine's phone was in the center console, her backpack on the seat, her laptop tucked safely inside along with $30, but while all of the material items that a young person would treasure were found in the car, there was still no sign of Elaine. With no note, no indication of a struggle, and no indication of a robbery. Law enforcement bizarrely suggested that this could have been a case of suicide where Elaine simply parked her car and then wandered into the ocean to end her life. No evidence via social media posts, text messages recovered, or eyewitness statements suggest that Elaine was suicidal. And while she, like most 20-year-olds, had her fair share of personal, familial, and relationship issues, by all indications, Elaine's focus was on self-care and positivity. In a seemingly continuous pattern of mistakes and procedural graphs of disastrous proportions by various Southern California law enforcement agencies, including the Glendale Police Department, as well as the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff's Station and Malibu Search and Rescue, there was absolutely no collection or testing of any of Elaine's mysteriously and abruptly abandoned personal items. with nothing being taken into custody for evidence processing. All of Elaine's belongings were given back to her family. Elaine's mom tells investigative journalist Neil Strauss that instead of preserving the artifacts for future testing or investigation, she washed and put away all of the belongings she received. Such a decision by police to not collect artifacts in the case brought back memories for locals of previous instances of mishap, and many expressed frustration towards the law enforcement agencies tasked with protecting the area. Critics of the investigation questioned why police were not doing more about the fact that young people were going missing from this area in far greater proportion in recent years. A sentiment presumably echoed by the parents of Matthew Weaver and Mitris Richardson as well, who fought tirelessly to get investigators to take the cases of their children's fate more seriously. When asked about Elaine's borrowing of money to feed and transport herself, Susan admits that she did require Elaine to pay her back on a strict and unforgiving schedule through a cash app on their phones. At her mother's meticulous attempt at collecting on the debts, Elaine's friend, Sadie, recalls that Elaine often had to ask her mother for money, and her mother reportedly hounded her to repay on time, even the smallest amount. Elaine told Sadie that her mother had taken roughly $8,000 which she had earned of her own accord from working as an extra on film sets, and Elaine was worried that her mom might take the future insurance settlement as well. Everything was about money, Sadie recalls, and Elaine was never made to feel like a daughter but more like a burden. Other red flags appear besides the lack of clarity surrounding the timeline and alibi of Susan, including the fact that she cleaned Elaine's room in the days after her disappearance and washed all potential evidence received back from police. Susan also disabled and deleted Elaine's iPhone by trying the password fuck as the last attempt, and she did not tell the neighbors that Elaine was missing, nor did she put up any flyers in their neighborhood. Susan admits she never passed out flyers in her neighborhood because she claimed she wanted the focus to be on the Calabasas area. But she also admits that the situation was embarrassing because the neighbors had been privy to her and Elaine's loud arguments, being that their volume was so great it could be heard from neighboring yards. Elaine's mother, Susan, gave a notably erratic and inconsistent explanation for the deletion of her text messages with her daughter. She initially tried to justify her actions by claiming it was a habitual practice to clear her plate of worries, but investigators found this reasoning questionable. If Elaine had supposedly stopped responding to her, they wondered why Susan would delete a thread about a current worry, one that was still unresolved. Without any prompting, Susan then claimed the deletion was an accident, insisting that she had tried to lock the message but accidentally deleted it instead. She went on to explain that she was a new iPhone user, having switched from a Samsung only 2 months prior. However, the problem with this explanation, as pointed out by Strauss in his report, was that Elaine's computer had records of prior text exchanges between Susan and Elaine discussing the issue of locking messages. This contradiction raised further suspicions about Susan's credibility and the authenticity of her claims. And in this archive data, it was clear that Susan was told by her daughter that this function was not something one could do on an iPhone. This was 2 months prior to the supposed attempted locking of the text thread and then the accidental deletion. So why Susan would attempt to do this non-existent action again is confusing to some and evidence of a cover-up to others. While Susan claims her usage of her new iPhone was limited, she actually got her iPhone 2 months prior to her daughter's disappearance and had already been somewhat trained on the differences in platforms. She specifically was told that she could not lock text messages as one could do in a Samsung phone, yet then goes on to deviate from her original story not 10 minutes after. In her own words, Elaine's mother, Susan, claims that after she receives text messages, she deletes them so as to unclutter her text feed and by extension her mind. In order to prove such habitual actions such as clearing old texts, she shows the investigative journalist her phone. But ultimately this proves quite the contrary, as a cornucopia of old text messages, both followed up upon and unfollowed up upon, were visible, even though Susan had previously just said she deleted text messages which required no follow-up in order to clear her phone. According to this logic, Susan would have only cleared the text messages which no longer needed to be replied to. But she claimed Elaine's was not one of those, and that she was so worried at Elaine's lack of response. Following Susan's own logic, if one is to believe that she is a serial text deleter, but only of texts which have been taken care of and already followed up upon, why did she delete Elaine's? If Susan's anxieties were in regards to the fact that she claimed she was concerned her daughter never texted her back, Why delete the unanswered texts from the person she was most concerned about? The only records that exist of such text message interactions are through Verizon Wireless, which merely show the numbers that communicated and the times at which they happened, but not the actual content of the messages, which are lost forever. The investigative journalist, Neil Strauss, even candidly comments in his report that he himself is uncomfortable with the obvious contradictions and apparent discrepancies. While the strange deletion of key text messages between Elaine and Susan and the forced auto-deletion of Elaine's phone could be mere coincidence, investigative journalist Neil Strauss later uncovered more disturbing information regarding Susan's new boyfriend, Jeff, via Susan's close friend and confidant. Jeff's wife had passed away 5 or 6 years prior viaduct suicide, and in an interview with a close friend of Susan, she says that she believes that she was told by Susan herself that the wife's suicide was due to an overdose of pills. This fact alone may not seem suspicious, but it is a detail which becomes more eerie and ominous when Strauss recalls that Susan had multiple times herself introduced the prospect that her daughter may have committed suicide. Jeff also mentions suicide as a possibility when there were no outward signs by any human or digital account that Elaine was contemplating hurting herself, or even that she was depressed. 3 weeks after her only daughter went missing, Susan insisted in an interview with ABC News that she just wanted to find Elaine's body. Not Elaine, her body. Many believe that this use of the word body was a strange linguistic distinction to make, especially when no outward signs of a fatality were known to police, as 3 weeks in, Elaine was still being treated as a missing persons case and not a homicide. Susan later said in an interview on CNN's Headline News Network, "I don't know what happened. I just need to find her body. I don't know what happened. I don't know." In a later interview, Susan said, "I thought it might be suicide, but they can't find the body. I still kind of feel in a way that she committed suicide and they just can't find the body in that spot." While Elaine's mother was the person who initially contacted the journalists, it came out that her motivation was more for money, as she believed that interacting with Neil Strauss would result in some sort of payday for her personally in the form of a GoFundMe donation in her name. This was made known to Strauss when it was revealed that Susan had called a man named Brandon, the account executive for the charitable foundation that Mike Ensinger, the guitarist for Incubus, runs. It was found that Susan had called him and told him that the GoFundMe account needed a cash infusion as it had been depleted paying the private investigator, Jaden Brandt. But Jaden Brandt later showed Strauss the original contract signed by both he and Elaine's mother, and it shows that this was a fee-free case, pro bono. And with the exception of the cost of a few reimbursements, he had no record of any spending expenditures which would have been involved with finding Elaine. Many involved wondered what had happened to the rest of the $15,000 in that GoFundMe account and why would it need more. The friend closest to Susan, outside of her boyfriend, says that Susan seemed to fixate on the belief that Elaine's on-again off-again boyfriend, DIV, was responsible for her not coming home. But despite her outward complaints about DIV, Elaine's mother refused to use the GoFundMe money raised by those concerned in order to pay a paltry fee of less than $30 for an official record of DIV's phone. Well, Jaden and that close friend of Susan's would recall how she would wax on regarding her belief that DIV was involved. The fact that she hoarded the GoFundMe money claiming that she might need it for funeral expenses when it could have gone towards real answers was highly suspicious to Jaden, the private investigator, and one of the first red flags for him. While Susan told her friend that she believed Elaine's boyfriend to be involved, this was a deviation from the narrative that Susan perpetuated regarding Elaine's possible suicidality or prostitution connections, as Susan later changed her story in subsequent interviews, and she would later go on to imply that sex work could be a possible reason for Elaine's disappearance. Susan postulates that Elaine may have willingly gone into prostitution or possibly that she was trafficked, a claim with no substantiation. Susan allowed the investigative journalist and his team to look at the items that had been in Elaine's car which had been returned and tested by police. Upon the initial inspection of those items, the lead singer of Incubus, Mike, also working on this case, recalls that the entire situation seemed almost staged, as a business card Elaine had been given advertising exotic modeling or perhaps dancing was prominently displayed in her bag as if put there on purpose. Later, Susan showed an uncomfortable and actively protesting Neil Strauss some lingerie from Elaine's bedroom drawer. She said, quote, "It's like a leather kinky stuff. You know, I would never even touch it. The reason why I mentioned it is that because at one point they mentioned about if she's doing prostitution." Susan also gave Elaine's 2 cats, Coco, and banded up for adoption mere months after her disappearance. With all the red flags, it was arranged by Jaden Brandt under the guise of more collection of possible data to have scent dogs come to inspect the park home. Cadaver dogs usually require training for about 18 to 24 months and are highly effective. They have an accuracy of about 95% when it comes to detecting the chemicals which mark human remains. They are so specialized that they can sometimes smell a body that's been buried up to 15 feet below ground. Their sense of smell is so good that they can detect 1 drop of blood in 13 million gallons of water, allowing them to detect remains which have been submerged underwater for up to 30 meters. They are highly trained in distinguishing between human remains and animal remains and will not mistake one for the other. On May 6, 2017, 2 cadaver dogs searched the home of and Susan Park, and while this was 6 months after Elaine's disappearance. The specialized nature of such animals makes this time passage less important. In fact, the Journal of Archaeological Method and Theory found that dogs could detect the telltale chemicals of death even 100 years later. The first cadaver dog showed what is called focused interest in Elaine's bedroom. From the report itself written by the handler of the 2 cadaver dogs, he says, quote, "Upon smelling the outside of the bedroom door, the first dog smelled. Sat and looked at me, indicating an alert of an odor in which he has previously been trained. He also alerted on the floor molding in the hallway near this door, in a small closet with cleaning supplies in the hallway, and in the clothes closet. Opening the closet door, he continued to show this focused interest in the contents, especially the suitcase and other items just inside the closet door. The only area of additional interest was a covered storage shed. The first dog showed interest in the shed area but did not single out one specific spot. Curiously, on March 31, 2017, 2 months after Elaine's disappearance, Susan made a calendar entry in her iPhone for 9 a.m. with the reminder to hide it. This timing coincided with the day that investigators were scheduled to visit Elaine's room at 10:30 a.m., just an hour and a half after the calendar alert. Later that same day, after all investigators had left, Susan made another calendar entry at 1:30 p.m., reminding her to put back hide items shed. These entries raised questions about Susan's actions and intentions surrounding the investigation. All gathered evidence, including emails, text messages, insurance documents, and the cadaver dog report, has been submitted to the authorities, and the case remains open and active. The Glendale Police Department welcomes any assistance from the public, no matter how small it may seem. Tips or information can be shared directly with local investigators. To provide any helpful details, you can contact Sergeant Ernesto Gaxiola or Sergeant James Ross at 818-548-4067. Pediatric. An attractive 37-year-old redhead, pediatric, became the victim of a disturbing and brutal murder in Fort Collins, Colorado, with a flawed investigation that resulted in the unjust conviction of a man who was only 15 at the time of the crime. On the evening of February 10, 1987, around 9 p.m., Pediatric left her job at Foothills Mall and began her walk home. As she didn't own a car and lived nearby, it was common for her to walk wherever she needed to go. After giving her apartment keys to a temporary roommate, Pediatric turned home to find herself locked out. Her roommate, who had been drinking, was passed out inside and couldn't unlock the door for her. Pediatric then left and went to a nearby bar, the Laughing Dog Saloon. She tried calling the apartment repeatedly to wake her roommate, but was unsuccessful. Pediatric was reportedly upset and spoke angrily about being locked out. After spending about 15 minutes in a second bar, the Prime Minister, it's speculated that Pediatric went to her ex-boyfriend's house nearby, as witnesses report seeing a woman matching her description loitering in the parking lot while smoking. The same brand of cigarettes found here was the brand found on Pediatric's body the next day. Also in her possession at the time of her discovery was a handwritten note that read, "Matt, I've been locked out of my apartment. Don't get grumpy if I come knocking around too." Pediatric managed to get back into her home around 12 a.m., where she got changed and then left again. A neighbor reported seeing Pediatric banging on the door, and her roommate confirmed this. Time framed to the police. Around 12:30 a.m., Peggy returned to the bar and bumped into her ex, Matt. While he was with another woman, Matt said they had a brief, friendly conversation before parting ways when his date arrived. Dawn, the woman Matt was with, mentioned that Matt kept glancing at Peggy and that she spoke with a group of men throughout the night. After that, the events of the evening remain unclear. According to Matt, he offered Pediatric a lift home, but she refused and they argued. He also said while she first accepted, he went to the bathroom and he came back to find her giving him a dirty look before she left without him. He and Dawn agreed that Pediatric left around 1:30 a.m., but they weren't certain that she left alone. Dawn went back to Matt since they'd till around 3 a.m. The next morning around 7 a.m., a cyclist discovered what he had first thought was simply a mannequin in a field. However, as he got closer, he saw the blood trail and the pool around the body and realized this was a human being. Pediatric had been extremely violent. Her clothing had been pushed aside and she had been brutally sexually mutilated to the point where the coroner said the work was precise and skilled and would require a level of expertise. Her cause of death was noted as being a stab wound to the upper left back, which likely occurred earlier that morning, with her time of death being placed between 6:30 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. Since we know Pediatric was alive at least at 1:30 a.m., the window of opportunity is narrowed. Significantly, previously that morning, someone else had actually seen Pediatric from a distance. 15-year-old Timothy Masters was on his way to school when he noticed it, but quickly dismissed it as a mannequin which had been placed there for a prank. From canvassing, policemen showed up at the door of Masters' home. Timothy's father mentioned to them that his son had gone a different route than normal that morning, and so he was pulled out of his class at school. The skewed investigation was led by Detective Jim Broderick, who had tunnel vision from the get-go. He horned in on Timothy Masters from the start, despite the fact that no physical evidence linked him to the crime. 2 hairs found on Pediatric and the prints on her purse did not match Timothy. On February 12th, Timmy's home was searched, as was his school locker. Authorities found 2,200 pages of writings and violent artwork in his room, school locker, and backpack which depicted images of murder and assaults. They also uncovered a knife collection, pornography, and a local newspaper with an account of the body's discovery in it. Again, no real physical evidence tied Timothy to Pediatric, as none of her DNA was on any of his clothing or any of his other belongings. There wasn't any in his room either. While Timothy was questioned with his father's permission, he wasn't questioned with an adult present, despite the fact that he was a minor. Police reportedly told him that they knew he'd committed the crime, but Timothy protested his innocence during the entire interrogation. He took a lie detector test, but its results were inconclusive. With no new leads, investigators seemed desperate. They'd planted an article containing false information in the local newspaper, attempting to provoke an incriminating reaction from Timothy. But even to the authorities surveying him closely, he had no such reaction. Attempting to put the past behind him, Timothy went on with his life, eventually serving time in the Navy. However, this would not dilute the police's interest in him. In 1992, a classmate told authorities that Timmy had told his friends details of the mutilations to Peggy's body. Timothy said that he had learned them from a friend in art class who had been part of the Explorer Scouts who helped the police search the crime scene, where he was told about the mutilations. Police found that Timothy's story checked out. 5 years later, Jim Broderick, the lead investigator on the case, contacted Dr. J. Reed Malloy, a forensic psychologist from California, and had him analyze the drawings and writings of 15-year-old Timothy Masters. Dr. Malloy concluded that some of these drawings depicted Timothy reliving the crime, and based his trial testimony on the drawings alone, having never once spoken with the boy. In 1999, the artwork was used to convince and sentence Timothy to life in prison. Timothy continued to protest his innocence and even appealed on multiple different occasions, but the appeals kept failing. In 2008, his defense attorneys released evidence proving his innocence further. DNA tested showing the crime scene samples did not include Timothy's DNA, but pointed to Peggy's ex-boyfriend, Matt. While Timothy Masters was exonerated in 2011, it has not led to answers in Peggy Hedrick's case. One suspect in the murder was a man named Dr. Richard Hammond, an eye surgeon who was arrested in 1995 for filming women and girls in his bathroom. Hammond's house overlooked the dumping ground for Peggy's body, and he was at home the morning of the murder when he was scheduled in for surgery that day. Since his profession required so much skill, it was thought that he would have the right expertise to perform the sexual mutilations that were carried out on Peggy. However, in March of 1995, just days after his arrest, Hammond committed suicide. Jim Broderick ordered the evidence in Hammond's case to be destroyed before a link could be looked for and established between him and Peggy. Command attention has turned toward Peggy's ex-boyfriend, Matthew Zallner, after Timothy was exonerated due to DNA evidence pointing to Matt. He was initially considered a suspect in 1987 but was quickly dismissed, though the reason remains unclear. As an ex-boyfriend with a constantly changing story and an alibi only until 3 a.m., Matt became a prime candidate in Peggy's murder. While it appears he is being reinvestigated, no new leads have emerged, leaving the case of Peggy Hedrick open and unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Deborah Lonsell. Debbie Lonsell, 29, was last seen at 2 a.m. on September 21, 1985, when she left her boyfriend's apartment to head home. Recently divorced, Debbie was a dedicated nurse who lived in a small apartment on Gerials Road in Belen. She had recently purchased a used Porsche 924, and her family described her as a fun-loving person who took her career seriously. 2 days later, on September 23rd, Debbie failed to show up for work, leading to her being reported missing. Law enforcement responded to Debbie's apartment, where they found the door ajar but no signs of foul play inside. Everything appeared normal, with nothing missing or out of place. However, Debbie's Porsche was gone from its parking spot. Investigators reportedly told her mother that most women leave voluntarily, but her family felt something was off about Debbie's disappearance. She had recently started a new chapter in her life and seemed to be in good spirits. They were confused as to why she would leave again. In the months following the disappearance, Debbie's case received very little media coverage. This is often seen as odd given that Debbie was a white blonde-haired attractive woman, the kind of woman who often receives far more attention than any other. It wasn't until months later, in January of 1986, that her case came to light again after the disappearance and subsequent murder of 22-year-old Linda D. Daniels that same month. The sudden attention surrounding Debbie's case led to an anonymous tip informing police that her car had been parked at an apartment building at 1520 Gold Southeast in Albuquerque. For several months, the vehicle showed visible dents and scratches not present before her disappearance. However, the car provided no new evidence, and there were no signs of foul play. Dark stains on the back seats were initially thought to be blood, but testing confirmed otherwise. In January 1987, a year later, remains were discovered in Berlin. Children playing in a pit behind Elksledge in the northern portion of the city discovered a skull believed to belong to a woman. There was much speculation that the skeletal body belonged to Debbie, but they were soon proven to be ancient Native American remains, and investigators were placed firmly back on square one. In August of 1988, Valencia County Sheriff Lawrence Romero stated that his office was reopening Debbie's case and promised they would take a hard look at some new leads. She was reportedly confident that a break in the case would come and that the disappearance would be solved once and for all. The case had been turned over to state police 2 years earlier, and upon hearing about the reopening, State Police Sergeant Herman Silva stated that it had never been closed or cold, and that he was unaware of the new leads Sheriff Romero was talking about. Notably, just 1 month after Debbie's case was reopened, Tara Calico went missing. Her disappearance took over newspaper headlines, and the vanishing of a 29-year-old nurse living in Berlin went largely forgotten. In December of 1988, for months after the reopening, skeletal remains were discovered by hunters in the Sandia Mountains. The skull was missing its wisdom teeth, and the remains overall were believed to be from a woman in her early 30s who had passed between 2 or 4 years before. Detectives began to believe that this was Debbie Lansdell. However, eventually dental comparisons were done between the two, and it was determined that they were not a match. The remains were later identified as belonging to Holly Harris, a 22-year-old who appeared in September of 1976. Little information is available in Holly's case, but her death was not treated as suspicious by authorities. Another female skull was discovered in July of 1991 in Valencia County off the Manzano Expressway that it was found not to belong to Debbie. It also did not belong to Tara Calico, although it was briefly suspected to have been hers. The skull contained 2 holes possibly made by bullets from a .22 caliber weapon and was likely from a young girl or a young boy between 13 to 14 years of age. No additional bones were found at the scene, and it is unclear if it was ever determined who the skull belonged to. Debbie's case is still unsolved. There has been little progress made throughout the entire investigation, and she appears to have been forgotten over time. 29-year-old Deborah Lansdell has been missing since September 21, 1985, and was last seen in Belen, New Mexico. Debbie Lansdell is described as a white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, standing 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing 120 pounds. No other distinguishing characteristics are known, and it is unclear what clothing she was wearing at the time of her disappearance. Her car, a rust-colored 1978 Porsche 924, was found on the 1500 block of Gold Southeast in Albuquerque in February 1986, 5 months after she went missing. If you have any information about Debbie's disappearance, please contact the Valencia County Sheriff's Department at 505-866-2400. Moving on to the next case. Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was born on April 23, 1948, and at the time of her disappearance, she was a single mother living in Stanton, California, with her aunt and her 4-year-old son. Dorothy worked as a secretary for 2 locally owned Anaheim stores. She was known to prefer staying at home with her son rather than socializing with others. A devout Christian, Dorothy avoided alcohol and drugs, and although she occasionally dated, she did not have a steady boyfriend. Months before Dorothy's disappearance, she began receiving chilling anonymous phone calls from a man who alternated between professing his love for her and threatening to kill her. The unidentified man claimed to have been stalking her and even provided accurate details of her daily life to prove it. On one occasion, he called Dorothy and told her to go outside, where she found a single dead rose on the windshield of her car. According to her mother, Dorothy recognized the voice but couldn't remember the man's name. Most terrifying of all, the man once told Dorothy he'd cut her up into pieces so no one would ever find her. Fearing for her life, Dorothy began to take karate lessons a week before her disappearance. When she even considered buying a handgun, something she didn't seem to go through with for fear that her son would get a hold of it and injure himself. May 28, 1980 was not a particularly unusual day. Around 9 p.m., Dorothy attended an employee meeting at her workplace and noticed that one of her colleagues looked ill and had an unusual red mark on his arm. She insisted on taking him to the hospital, accompanied by another female employee. Dorothy stopped by her parents' home to check on her son and inform them about the situation before heading to the UC Irvine Medical Center's emergency room with her colleagues. Doctors and nurses quickly discovered that Dorothy's colleague had been bitten by a black widow spider and treated him accordingly, discharging him with medication at 11 p.m. Throughout the treatment, neither Dorothy nor her female colleague left the waiting room. Thoughtful as always, Dorothy decided to fetch her car from its parking spot and bring it to the exit so her recovering colleague wouldn't have to exert much energy. As she went to retrieve the car, her colleagues waited. However, after some time, they saw she still hadn't turned up, and so they stepped outside into the parking lot to see what was going on. Suddenly, Dorothy's car came speeding at them. the headlights blinding them, and the car sped past and took a sharp right out of the lot. Thinking something had happened to Dorothy's son, the pair waited for her to return. But she never would. After several hours of silence, Dorothy's parents were contacted. They confirmed that she hadn't returned home and went on to call the authorities. At 4:30 a.m. on May 29th, Dorothy's car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, was found, burning in an alley 10 miles away from the hospital. Her body was nowhere to be found. About a week after their daughter had vanished, Dorothy's parents began to receive strange and unsettling calls from an unidentified male who said, "I've got her," and hung up. He called almost every Wednesday afternoon when Dorothy's mother was home alone and would tell her that he had Dorothy or that he'd killed her. The phone calls were always brief, to the point that the authorities couldn't trace them. In April 1984, the man called in the evening. This seemed to be a mistake, as once Dorothy's father answered, the man stopped calling for months. In June of 1980, the Orange County Register newspaper reported on the case of Dorothy and was later in the day contacted by an unknown man who said, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having anyone else. Killed her." The caller also knew that her colleague had suffered from a spider bite on May 28th, and they knew that that day, Dorothy had changed from a black scarf to a red scarf. After the employee meeting, neither of these details had been made public at that time. The unknown man also claimed that Dorothy had called him that night, but her colleagues disputed this by saying she was never out of their sight. It took 4 years following her disappearance for Dorothy's body to surface. On August 6, 1984, a construction worker discovered her skeletal, partially charred remains about 30 feet from the Santa Ana Canyon Road. Curiously, her body was found alongside that of a dog. Authorities speculated that the charring had come from a bushfire in 1982. Dorothy's turquoise ring was found along with her watch, which had stopped at 12:30 a.m. May 29th, about an hour after her car was last seen. Roughly a week later, the body was conclusively identified as Dorothy's through dental records, whose sister was a colleague of Dorothy's before she disappeared. However, any leads from this are slow to surface. Dorothy's parents, who had raised her child after she went missing, both passed away without seeing justice served for their daughter's disappearance. As of 2020, the case of Dorothy Jane Scott remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Holly Roth. Born Helen Marjorie Roth in 1916 in Chicago, Illinois, Holly Roth was raised in both the U.S. and Europe, spending time in New York City, New York, and London, England due to her father's work. She attended various schools and was also taught by private tutors. Despite frequently moving between states, she considered herself a New Yorker and graduated from James Madison High School in Brooklyn. Holly later studied at several universities and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree. For a brief period, Holly worked as a fashion model but soon transitioned into a career as a writer and editor for newspapers and magazines. She eventually began writing her first book, The Content Assignment, which was serialized in 1953 in a condensed form under the title The Girl Who Vanished. Holly went on to write several more books and short stories in the spy fiction and detective fiction genres, using the pen names P.J. Merrill and K.G. Ballard, achieving some success. One of her stories was even nominated for an Edgar Award, though she is often regarded as an underrated writer whose work was frequently overlooked in the 1950s. In 1960, at the age of 44, Holly married Joseph Franta, a 32-year-old man with a Swiss passport, who was born and raised in Prague, Czech Republic. The pair had met in Geneva, Switzerland, when Joseph had been working with the International Labor Organization. Later that year, Joseph purchased a 49-foot catch, a type of sailboat named the Visa, which he paid $8,500 for. The Visa had been built in Norway in 1912 and weighed 25 tons. Joseph subsequently put the boat in his wife's name, and Holly spent around $20,000 on renovations. Holly's brother, Frank, who last saw his sister just before she tied the knot, noted, that the newly wedded couple spent time living in Paris and Majorca for several years, but spent the last year of her life living aboard the Visa. At the end of 1963, Holly wrote to her editor, stating, "We keep trying to cross the ocean. One thing or another stops us, but we remain happy enough." In another letter to her brother, dated March 30, 1964, she mentioned wanting to return to New York but explained that her husband was having trouble entering the U.S. due to being blackballed by the CIA. Several months later, on October 8, Holly and her husband left Gibraltar, planning to travel to the Canary Islands on their visa. However, just 2 days into the journey, the weather turned, and they became caught in a storm. Then, at around 4 a.m. on October 11th, Holly vanished. Joseph stated that the couple had been 20 miles north of Safi, a city in western Morocco, when a force suddenly shook the boat, throwing him against the wall below deck. At the time, Holly had been above deck. When he scrambled to check on her, he noticed a 45-foot-long gray-colored sailing ship moving away from the Visa. Joseph believed he saw someone in the water wearing a life jacket and called out, but he received no answer. He subsequently steered the boat in the direction of the body and threw out a buoy, but to no avail. He then twice tied a line to himself and descended into the water to try and locate Holly, but he failed to find her. Back on board the boat, he fired flares and a gun to attract fishing boats he'd spotted earlier before making radio contact with Safi. No one immediately came to his or Holly's rescue. It wasn't until around noon that a fishing trawler arrived and the Visa was towed to the city. Several boats searched the area where Holly is believed to have fallen overboard, but no trace of her was found. A later report listed the 48-year-old as having died from an accident, presumed to be lost at sea and drowned. The following month, a source at the U.S. State Department revealed that the investigation into Holly's disappearance remained open, although Moroccan police had closed the case 2 days later, declaring her death accidental. Afterward, Joseph stayed in Morocco for a short time, attempting to sell the Visa, which had sustained nearly $6,000 in damage during a collision with another sailboat. It remains unclear whether Joseph ever managed to sell the Visa or what happened to him after Holly's disappearance. Holly's body has never been recovered. Paul Stephen Gendreau. 51-year-old Paul Stephen Gendreau lived in Moyac, North Carolina in 2010. He had 2 daughters, Stephanie and Christina. Paul had been married multiple times and was a retired Navy chief. Before retiring from the Navy, Paul achieved the rank of Grand Master Chief. Paul's brother, Mike, described him as a stand-up guy with many close friends and family members. At the time, Paul was married to Letitia Gendreau. They met in 2002 at a kickboxing class. Letitia, 29 years old, was a competitive bodybuilder and an accomplished sportswoman. In June of 2010, she won the National American Sports Federation's North Carolina Bodybuilding Championship. Letitia worked in human resources at a children's hospital in Norfolk, Virginia. Although she was described as very shy, Paul was eager to get to know her. He suggested they become workout partners, and their relationship began to blossom. At the time, Paul was still married, waiting for his divorce to be finalized. Despite being an unlikely pair and complete opposites, Paul and Letitia's connection grew stronger. Paul was outgoing, and Letitia was quiet and shy. After a few months of dating, Paul asked Letitia to move in with him. In May of 2003, Paul's divorce was finalized, and a month later, he married Letitia. They were described as happy and affectionate with one another. In 2009, Letitia started working for Blackwater Airlines and continued to train for her bodybuilding competitions. Letitia had won or placed highly in several competitions, and Paul would often travel with her to these events, proudly sharing her achievements with his friends. However, on June 30, 2010, Paul didn't show up for work. He worked for a company that serviced Navy ships and typically arrived around 5:30 a.m. He had been preparing an important presentation, making his absence unusual. Around 7:45 a.m., Paul's coworkers reported him missing. Paul led a very punctual life, so his coworkers were immediately concerned. Deputy Sheriff Lisa Starcher from the Currituck County Sheriff's Office drove out to the Jean DRO home to perform a welfare check. Letitia arrived at Paul's Brumsey Landing home. There were multiple cars spotted in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Paul's coworkers reached out to Letitia through her workplace to inquire about his whereabouts. Letitia informed them that she didn't know and left work to meet with the deputy. She allowed the deputy into their home and explained that she and Paul slept in separate bedrooms due to the noise from his CPAP machine. However, when she entered Paul's bedroom, she noticed the machine was missing. Letitia explained that they had an open relationship and were both seeing other people. Letitia said Paul most likely just left on his own to stay with one of these other women. But after a few days of back and forth and no news of Paul's whereabouts, the authorities determined some foul play was involved. Paul's co-workers came to the same conclusion. They went out looking for him and handed out missing persons flyers. It was evident that Paul was well respected and loved by those around him. On July 1, 2010, police were informed that his phone had pinged off a tower in Elizabeth's City, approximately 30 minutes from his home. The authorities canvassed nearby hotels and discovered that Paul might have been seen at a Hampton Inn. The hotel manager, upon seeing a photo of Paul, confirmed that she had seen him the previous night and the following morning. She noted that Paul had been acting strangely. However, this turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. Paul had not registered at the hotel, and he was not seen on any of the surveillance cameras. Later that same day, a construction worker found Paul's phone in the parking lot of an elementary school in Elizabeth City. The construction worker had called Paul's brother, Mike G. Andro, who said that his brother was missing. The construction worker then turned Paul's phone into the Elizabeth City Police Department. The police continued to canvass the area near the elementary school. A utility worker also claimed to have spotted Paul walking down the street. However, the police were sure that it was a case of mistaken identity, which they would later be right about. Still on July 1st, the police received a 911 call from one of Paul and Letitia's neighbors. They had spotted Letitia and an unknown man moving furniture from the house. The man was later identified as Letitia's brother, 39-year-old Eugene Askew. When the police arrived, they told Letitia to move the furniture back into the house. She complied and said she was getting some new furniture and taking the old stuff to put in storage. Letitia and Paul's neighbors had also noticed that Letitia was putting things up on the windows to keep people from looking in. Letitia had used wrapping paper and frosting spray to cover up the windows. The neighbors and co-workers told the police that things in the G. Andros marriage had taken a dark turn. After trying to have a baby, Letitia had gotten pregnant with twins after going through several rounds of IVF. Letitia ended up losing the babies about 21 weeks into the pregnancy. Letitia had also said they were separating and both seeing other people. Paul's co-workers said that Paul had filed for divorce and wanted Letitia out of the house. 2 weeks before he disappeared, Paul had filed a report that someone had keyed his car. Paul kept his beloved Dodge Charger in pristine condition. The police learned that it had most likely been Letitia because the car had been kept in the garage. Letitia had mentioned this to the police, but never admitted to doing it. On July 2nd, Letitia agreed to turn over Paul's personal computer. But when the police went to the G. Andros house, she wasn't there. The note on the door said, "Went to River's Edge. Call me on my cell. Thanks." However, Letitia did not answer her phone. Letitia ended up calling 911 to report that people were outside her house when she was not home. She told the dispatcher that she was in Chesapeake, Virginia. The dispatcher was able to trace the phone call from the Brumsey Landing home. Letitia was inside the house, and her behavior had become very odd. Just after midnight on July 3rd, the police returned to the house with a search warrant. Letitia did not answer the door. The police found the garage door unlocked, but it was barricaded with heavy garbage. They were eventually able to make entry and found Letitia hiding in a closet covered by clothes. Letitia was read her rights and claimed she had been hiding because she was afraid that people thought that she did something to Paul. She kept her head in her hands and would not make eye contact. While Letitia was being questioned, other detectives were searching the house. In a twist, in the master bedroom where Paul slept, the police found blood spatter, a bullet hole in the wall, and a bullet skid mark under a rug. The rug had been glued to the floor. In the garage, the police discovered a blue tote. A shower curtain was taped over the top of the tote. After removing the shower curtain, the police were hit with the smell of decomposition. Paul's body was recovered under several layers of plastic, tape, and kitty litter. He was shot with a .45 caliber handgun 5 times, once each in the abdomen, chest, thigh, neck, and hand. Paul had about 12 lacerations to his head that were consistent with being struck by a blunt object such as a pistol. His cell phone was missing from the residence. Officers discovered an assortment of cleaning supplies in the residence and reported that the primary bedroom's hardwood floor looked like it had been scrubbed. The officers also confiscated spent bullets from the scene. They also confiscated duct tape, caulking, and plastic wrap among other items from the kitchen. Letitia was confronted about what they had found. She then spun a story about how she had hired several men in Elizabeth City to beat Paul. She said she met random men on the street in Elizabeth City and said that Paul was mistreating her. The police did not believe Letitia, and they arrested her. In yet another twist, after spending about a day in jail, Letitia said she wanted to talk. Now, she said she did take Paul's life, but in self-defense. Letitia said Paul attacked her on the morning of July 30, 2010. She said he came into her room with a gun and said he wanted her out of the house by the time he came home from work. Letitia said she grabbed her gun, a .45mm, walked to Paul's bedroom and just kept shooting. She said they struggled even after he was shot several times. The police recovered Letitia's gun from her car at the house. The gun was registered to one of Letitia's boyfriends, Kyle Koenig, a retired Air Force general. She had stolen the gun from him. Letitia had been sued by another boyfriend. The police found a copy of the lawsuit at the house. The man claimed he had been taken advantage of by Letitia. Letitia had asked for money and claimed that she was pregnant with his twins. The man spoke to Paul about it and Paul filed for divorce. A receipt was also found in the house for the purchase of the tote. Letitia was seen on surveillance footage at Lowe's buying the tote. In September of 2012, Letitia testified at her trial. She maintained her story that she had shot Paul in self-defense. However, the evidence did not match with her story. Paul had suffered from multiple gunshot wounds and severe blunt force trauma. There was a bullet hole found in the master bedroom door. It is believed that Paul had the door closed and that he had been ambushed by Letitia. Letitia shot him several times and hit him in the head with the gun. The attorney and one of his co-workers also alleged that Paul had told them about one night when he woke up to find Letitia crawling across his room. Paul reportedly told his attorney that he used to keep the door of his room locked from then on. Paul's brother, Mike, said he had last met with Paul in February while attending the Daytona 5100 stock car race. He also testified that Paul had told him about his marital problems and also alleged that Letitia was cheating on him. Mike reminisced. He had been talking about divorce for weeks, claiming she was cheating on him and that he had plenty of evidence. He told me he just needed her to leave so he could get his life back. After deliberating for an hour and 40 minutes, the jury found Letitia guilty on September 28, 2012 of taking Paul's life and larceny of a firearm. Letitia was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Her appeal was denied in 2014. It is believed that she took Paul's life to maintain the lifestyle he had provided her. Letitia was known to be a master manipulator, using Paul and other men to her advantage. According to official records, Letitia is currently incarcerated at Anson Correctional Institution in Polton, North Carolina. Sonia Carmen Hero K. Stone. Sonia Carmen Hero K. Stone, born on May 27, 1951, in Quebec, Canada, relocated to the United States in the 1970s. She married Michael Stone in 1976, and they had a daughter together, but their marriage ended in divorce. By 1980, Sonia was a single mother, raising her 4-year-old daughter on her own while working for the Levi Strauss Company. On October 15, 1981, after taking her daughter to school and running errands, Sonia Carmen Hero K. Stone returned home. Around 12 p.m., her friend, Caroline McBride, visited her after multiple attempts to reach her by phone went unanswered. Upon arriving at Sonia's home in Carmel Point, Monterey County, California, Caroline discovered Sonia's lifeless body just inside the front door. The 30-year-old Sonia appeared to have been sexually assaulted, lying on the floor with her purse nearby, its contents spilled around her. Sonia was half-dressed and had been strangled with a pair of her own pantyhose, which was found tightly wrapped around her neck. Her shirt and jacket were torn and pulled back. A terrified Caroline placed a call through to the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, who immediately dispatched officers to the crime scene. The investigators were of the opinion that the position where Sonia was found in her home suggested that she was attacked as soon as she opened her front door to go in. They also examined Sonia Carmen's body and discovered that she had a broken left ring fingernail with blood beneath it, which indicated that she had struggled with her killer, ultimately scratching him before her death. The brutal crime that took the life of Sonia Carmen Herrick Stone left both the police and her family searching for answers. The following day, investigators canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and conducting interviews. When one detective interviewed Michael Scott Glacebrook, a 25-year-old neighbor who lived directly across the street from Sonia, he noticed a 3-4-inch vertical scratch on his right cheek. The detective immediately inquired about how and when he had sustained the injury. Glacebrook, however, made inconsistent statements. He told the detective he got it from cutting plexiglass in his garage, while he told his parents that he got it in a fight at Monterey Peninsula College, where he schooled. Due to his inconsistency, Michael Scott Glacebrook was charged with Sonia Carmen's death in 1982. But when the case went to trial in 1983, the jury came back with a 9-3 not guilty verdict, which made the district attorney's office decide not to retry the case, even though a retrial was possible regardless of the jury's decision. Michael Scott was, however, discharged and acquitted. With no significant DNA technology in the 1970s, the case could not be pursued and it went cold for 39 years. In the year 2020, detectives at the Monterey County Sheriff's Office and Deputy District Attorney Matt L. Hierro re-examined the Sonia Carmen Stone's case. They found out that there were several pieces of evidence in Sonia's case file that could be now tested utilizing modern DNA technology. These pieces of evidence, including the DNA found under Sonia's broken fingernail and right breast, were sent to the Department of Justice DNA laboratory for testing. Since Michael Scott Glacebrook was the #1 suspect on the list of the investigators, in 1981, detectives got a search warrant for a new sample of his DNA. They were able to obtain a new DNA profile easily because Michael Scott Glacebrook was still alive and works in Monterey County. After the DNA sample from Sonia Carmen Stone's crime scene was tested and compared with the DNA sample gotten from Michael Scott Glacebrook, it immediately came out as a match. Doctors then conducted surveillance at Michael Scott Glacebrook's residence in the city of Seaside. Around 8 p.m. on August 14, 2021, Glacebrook drove away from his home. Michael Scott Glacebrook was eventually arrested in connection with the murder of Sonia Carmen Hero K. Stone. In a symbolic gesture to honor Sonia, all detectives involved in his capture wore Levi's jeans, a nod to her time working at Levi Strauss. After an 8-day jury trial in 2023, Glacebrook, now 67 years old, was convicted of Sonia's murder. He is set to be sentenced in April, with the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison without parole. Following the conviction, Sonia's daughter, now 44, expressed her relief, saying, It's been a day that we have been waiting for a really long time. Sonia was a wonderful woman, and we're so happy to see justice for her. Moving on to the next case. Scott Johnson and Michael Noon formed a deep connection after meeting at the University of Cambridge, where Scott had moved to pursue his studies in mathematics. Their relationship blossomed, with Scott, originally from the United States, and Michael, an Australian musicologist, finding a strong bond despite the different paths their lives had taken. The couple's love for each other grew as they navigated life and England together, creating a life of shared experiences and passions. Then, in 1986, Scott moved to Canberra, Australia on a student visa to complete his PhD at the Australian National University. That way he could be with Michael. On December 10, 1988, a man's body was found on rocks at the foot of cliffs at Bluefish Point in North Head, near Manly, Sydney. The man was quickly identified as 27-year-old Scott Johnson. The police initially believed that he took his own life and jumped down the cliff. His family disputed this. They brought up the fact that his clothes were neatly folded on top of the cliff, and that his wallet was stolen. One of Scott's professors also said that he had just put the final touches on his PhD. He was hopeful for the future and could have a job at any of the great universities around the world. Something else that pointed to the possibility that Scott was pushed and did not jump was that there were gangs of men who roamed various Sydney locations in search of gay men to hurt. It was only in 2017 that investigators believed that Scott did not take his own life. A renewed police investigation was then launched. In 2018, a $1 million reward for information which could help solve the crime was announced. Scott's brother, Steve Johnson, who is a tech entrepreneur, then gave a $1 million of his own money to make the reward $2 million. The reward proved to be key to finally solving this cold case. In May of 2020, investigators arrested Scott White in connection to the case. It was announced that someone came forward and told investigators that White was the one that pushed Scott off the cliff. Then, on January 10, 2022, White confessed in court. He took responsibility for taking Scott's life. White is now convicted of the crime and will soon be sentenced. Steve expressed a mix of relief and sorrow after the arrest, saying, "Suddenly it was over. This man finally found the soul to confess and put an end to this. My family is all in tears." The emotional weight of the confession was evident, as the long-awaited closure brought both grief and a sense of justice. Investigators, now with new leads, have started looking into similar crimes from the 1970s and 1980s, hoping to uncover any further connections and bring additional resolution to unresolved cases. Moving on to the next case. Ruby Griffiths, born in Utah in 1982, was one of 4 sisters. She met Kevin Frank, an engineering professor at Brigham Young University, shortly after becoming an adult. The couple married quickly and had their first child, Sherry, in 2003, followed by 5 more children, with the youngest born in 2013. The family was devoted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Ruby later explained that her social media presence allowed her to share her beliefs in a way they normally wouldn't. In 2015, Ruby started documenting the lives of her family on their YouTube channel, 8 Passengers. Over time, the Frank family's vlogs gained more than 2 million subscribers and around 1 billion views. On the surface, they appeared to be just another typical American family, but the early criticisms mainly centered on the children's lack of privacy. The family filmed intimate moments, like their children's first shaves and a shopping trip where one of their daughters was buying a bra. Critics argued that this content was exploitative and unnecessary, particularly when paired with clickbait titles and thumbnails. Many raised concerns that such content might attract individuals with more sinister intentions. In the weeks that followed, fresh vlogs revealed troubling details about the Frank children, including the fact that several of them had no friends and 2 of the older children had not had access to their mobile phones for over a year. Viewers grew increasingly concerned about Ruby's harsh disciplinary methods, which included withholding food and proper bedding as punishment for minor offenses. This raised alarm, leading to widespread exposure of the 8 Passengers channel across various internet communities. Military channels like J. Aubrey Swoop and H3H3 picked up on the viral clips discussing Ruby's controversial approach to parenting. Ruby responded by sending multiple cease and desist letters to these commentary YouTubers, including Ready to Glare and Sloan. One of the most notable instances of Ruby's so-called punishments was when her 6-year-old daughter turned up to school with no lunch. When she was contacted by the girl's teacher and asked to drop something off, Ruby refused. She claimed that it was the 6-year-old's responsibility to pack her own lunch in the morning and said that going hungry throughout the day would be a punishment which would help her daughter remember that she needed to make lunch for herself. Ruby added that she asked that her daughter not be given anything to eat by the school or her peers. In various other clips, Ruby can be seen telling 2 of her children that if they don't behave, they will not be allowed to eat dinner, threatening to behead one child's plush toy, and even at one point claiming that Santa wouldn't be visiting the 2 children that year because they were not responding to other forms of punishment. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. During TAP News, Ruby and Kevin Funk's disciplinary methods also included extreme measures like keeping their children home from school and making them clean the floorboards. Ruby defended these actions by saying, "It's because they're so numb. And the more numb your child is, the bigger the outcome they need to wake them up." One of the most controversial incidents was when they sent their 14-year-old son to a wilderness camp called the Anasazi Foundation Wilderness Program. The program's website claims it helps improve parent-child relationships by guiding children through wilderness experiences. This decision sparked further concern from the public, as it raised questions about the extent of Ruby and Kevin's methods to correct their children. The foundation, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Arizona, was founded in 1988 and reportedly aims to give troubled teens a chance to heal at the hands of nature. It offers not only the wilderness camp, but also several other resources for parents, including parents' seminars. The wilderness program saw the Franks' eldest son be sent away from home for 10 weeks while living in the Arizona desert. According to Kevin, the idea with wilderness therapy is if you can survive with these years in the wilderness with nothing more than the clothes on your back and a couple of field supplies, then there's nothing in this world you can't tackle. Ruby added that out in the desert there were real threats, including snakes, bears, and cougar, stating, "I think close encounters would be good for him." The Franks never disclosed the specific actions that led them to send their 14-year-old son to the Anasazi Wilderness Program, a camp designed for troubled youths where he was separated from everyone and everything he knew for over 2 months. However, even after his return, the punishment continued. In a later video, it was revealed that when the son was 15, he had lost access to his bedroom and had to sleep on a bean bag in the living room for 7 months. This punishment followed a series of pranks he had played on his younger brother, including one where he falsely told him they were going to Disneyland in the early hours, causing the younger sibling to pack a suitcase and head to the car, only to be devastated when the trip didn't happen. On another occasion, the son pointed a BB gun at his younger brother's face. These excessive and disproportionate punishments, including practices like ritualized starvation, sparked outrage and led to several exposes by the commentary community, further damaging the Franks' public image. But these critical videos are not without justification. Experts have noted that such severe discipline often does far more harm than good. Psychologist Marion Barker spoke with Business Insider about the issue surrounding the harsh punishment of children, stating, "It is simply concerned with getting the child to conform to a set of predetermined, often poorly communicated and ever-changing set of goalposts. So the child is almost doomed to fail. Children make choices with their behavior based on their emotions. And if you don't seek to understand and discuss these emotions, the child ends up storing up a host of resentment and anger at the very least. Worse, she added, children can develop issues with self-worth and abandonment. Taking a child's bed is considered one of the worst forms of punishment a parent can dole out, as everyone seeks safety in their environment, and taking away the bed, quote, strips this out entirely and actually leaves the child in trauma. Likely due to the scandal in 2021, the 8 Passengers channel began to decline in popularity, and uploads became less frequent. Kevin told the media that the backlash the family had received over their punishments tactics had also led them to losing brand deals and sponsorships. Eventually, the channel was deleted altogether, and in its place in June 2022, Connections was established. This new channel was designed to give and share family and parenting advice. Several years earlier in 2019, Ruby had met Jodi Hildebrandt after she counseled one of the Frank children. Following this, Ruby hired Hildebrandt as her personal mentor. Ruby later claimed that Jodi Hildebrandt's teachings had profoundly warped her perspective, stating, "I was led to believe this world was an evil place filled with cops who control hospitals, that injure government agencies, that brainwash church leaders who lie and lust, husbands who refuse to protect, and children who need abuse." Jodi Hildebrandt was born in June 1969 and pursued a degree in English literature at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, before earning a master's degree in educational psychology from the University of Utah. Following her studies, Hildebrandt worked as the program director at a drug rehabilitation facility in Utah and became a licensed counselor in 2005. In 2007, she founded Connections, initially described as a counseling company focusing on relationships and businesses. However, Hildebrandt's career has been marked by controversy and a troubled track record. In 2012, she was put on probation for 18 months after disclosing sensitive confidential information about a former client to the LDS Church and Brigham Young University several years earlier. She claimed that the patient had serious issues but never formally diagnosed him, and reportedly didn't even spend enough time with the patient to figure out what was going on. Furthermore, in 2010, a teen living with Hildebrandt described as her niece reported her to the police after being forced to sleep outside in a sleeping bag and having duct tape placed over her mouth. The teen also described being made to wear the same clothes for weeks on end, and investigators discovered that the girl was not enrolled in school. The teenager told officers, "Jodi is some kind of therapist and thinks she has all the answers. But Jodi insults me all the time in front of others and acts like I am evil by not letting me talk to kids or others." Neighbors recalls that in 2020, the Frankie family first moved to Springville. Initially, they interacted with their local church and the children befriended others their own age. But as the years passed, the children were eventually removed from school. Around the same time as Connections came into play, Ruby and Kevin separated, with Kevin moving out of the family home in August 2022. The children were frequently left home alone from this point on. And eventually, the blinds were left permanently closed and paper was placed over the windows. Both neighbors and the oldest Frankie daughter, who was now at university, repeatedly tried to involve the police, but their requests that the children be checked on often led nowhere, as the children never answered the door. The audience Hildebrandt and Ruby had on Connections was not nearly as large and loyal as it had been on the 8 Passengers channel. Ruby also created a new Instagram account as part of her work with Connections called Moms of Truth, which similarly to Connections offered parenting advice. On the Instagram account, Ruby stated that followers should avoid what she referred to as coping strategies. These coping strategies included social media, exercise, and socializing. Unsurprisingly, many people, including other parents, found the strategies that Connections taught to be extreme and harsh, with some critics likening the program to a cult. NBC News reported that several former clients said Hildebrandt's techniques were based in the LDS faith and that she used an extreme approach that included shaming her clients. Connections branded itself as a support group designed for mothers, intended to help treat those lost in the darkness of a distortion. Together, Ruby and Hildebrandt created video content that taught things including parents shouldn't love their children unconditionally or that children don't deserve privacy. The pair were also accused of being homophobic, transphobic, ableist, and racist in this content. Everything in Ruby's life turned upside down when she and Hildebrandt were arrested in Aubens, Utah on August 30, 2023 on suspicion of child abuse. Shortly before their arrest, Ruby's youngest son, now 12, climbed out of a window in the home he and his siblings shared with Hildebrandt and ran to a neighbor's house. He asked for food and water, and the neighbor was alarmed to discover duct tape on the boy's ankles and wrists. They promptly alerted the police. Arrests records later stated that he was taken to the hospital and treated for deep lacerations from being tied up with rope as well as malnourishment. His 9-year-old sister, Ruby's youngest daughter, was also rescued from the scene and found to be malnourished. The 2 remaining children in the house were taken into custody of Child Protection Services. Ruby's youngest son told police that Hildebrandt would put cayenne pepper and honey on their wounds, which were caused by being tied with a rope. Inside the home, investigators discovered cello tape, saran wrap, lots of paperwork, 2 superabsorbing dressings, 2 Coban bandages, 3 sets of brown and white rope, 2 pairs of handcuffs, and 3 carabiners. Further information documented in the arrest record showed that Ruby had filmed the video in Hildebrandt's house just days earlier, meaning she was very aware of the abuse her children were suffering. She was denied bail following her arrest given the state of her children and the fact that investigators still needed to speak with them. Both Ruby and Hildebrandt were subsequently charged with 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse during a shelter hearing about Ruby's 4 youngest children. Her 2 oldest children had not been living at home at the time of the abuse. She made the bizarre allegation that one of the children had been sexually abusing a younger sibling and had allegedly confessed to sexually abusing others. In mid-December, Ruby's lawyers claimed she was a devoted mother, as they looked to secure a plea deal. They claimed that Hildebrandt had taken advantage of the mother of 6, noting, quote, over an extended period, Hildebrandt systematically isolated Ruby Frank from her extended family, all the children and her husband, Kevin Frank. This prolonged isolation resulted in this Frank being subjected to a distorted sense of morality shaped by Hildebrandt's influence. A statement filed with the court to support her guilty pleas revealed that Ruby had abused her children from May 22, 2023 up until her arrest. She claimed that the punishments were a form of repentance and described her actions as acts of love. She also admitted that her actions involved physical torture. She sent her 12-year-old son to carry out demanding manual labor without shoes or water, leaving him with damaging sunburn. Furthermore, the boy was given little food and was often given plain meals while everyone else got different, more flavorful dishes compared to him. Ruby also admitted to kicking the young boy while wearing boots, holding his head underwater, and hog-tying him. He was kept isolated with no entertainment. Ruby's youngest daughter didn't fare better. She was also forced to work outside, run on dirt roads without shoes for lengthy periods of time, and was starved and not given water. Both children were declined beds and had their heads shaved as punishment. In her diaries, Ruby referred to the children as spawns of Satan and of her son stated, quote, I will not feed a demon. She also called him a compulsive liar with a cold, dead heart. As for her youngest daughter, she wrote that she was manipulative and recounted the time she had had her stand in the rain for hours, cut off her hair, and once doused her in dog wash water after she complained about being hungry. Prosecutors later noted in a statement, the women appeared to fully believe that the abuse they inflicted was necessary to teach the children how to properly repent for imagined sins and to cast the evil spirits out of their bodies. Both Ruby and Hildebrandt were deemed to be motivated by religious extremism. Ruby's husband, Kevin, reported that he had not seen his children for around 13 months, since he and his wife had separated, and that he had no idea about the abuse that was happening. He added that Hildebrandt played a role in the couple's marriage disintegrating, claiming that she manipulated him and destroyed his family. As the relationship between Kevin and Ruby grew strained after she began working on connections. Ruby reportedly told her husband before he left that though their marriage needed work, it would be better if he moved out and ceased contact with his 4 youngest children. Notably, following her mother's arrest, the oldest Frankie child, Sherry, who was 20 at the time and studying at university, posted a picture on her Instagram stories of police officers at Hildebrandt's house, simply captioned, "Finally." Sherry had said in an April 2023 podcast that she had cut ties with her family a year earlier after she discovered that her mother was working on connections with Hildebrandt. In another Instagram post, she wrote, "Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS for years about this, and so glad they finally decided to step up. Kids are safe, but there's a long road ahead." Ruby's 3 sisters, who all have YouTube channels themselves, released a statement which claimed that they had been keeping quiet about Ruby for several years for the sake of her children, noting, quote, "Behind the public scene, we have done everything we could to try and make sure the kids were safe. Ruby was arrested, which needed to happen. Jody was arrested, which needed to happen. The kids are now safe, which is the #1 priority." Following Ruby's arrest, Kevin began seeking custody of his children and filed for divorce. He also attempted to get his eldest daughter, Sherry, arrested for stealing electronics and passports 2 days after the arrest, stating that she was not lawfully allowed in their home. Sherry claimed she was not aware that she was not allowed into her parents' home, and Kevin allegedly threatened to sue the police department because they declined to press charges against her. Ruby ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 counts of child abuse in December 2023 and was given 1 to 15-year sentences in prison. Hildebrandt received the same sentence, and they will both serve them consecutively. Due to a Utah law that caps the sentence duration for consecutive penalties, they will only serve 30 years max in prison, despite their sentences totaling a maximum of 60 years. At the sentencing, Jody Hildebrandt claimed, "I sincerely loved those children. One of the reasons I didn't go to trial is because I didn't want them to relive this. I desire for them to heal physically and emotionally." However, the prosecution dismissed her statements, portraying her as a continuing risk to the community. They emphasized her apparent lack of remorse for her actions, underscoring the severity of the harm inflicted. Ruby, in her plea of guilty, stated with deep remorse, "With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children guilty." At her sentencing hearing, she further expressed her anguish, saying, "I'll never stop crying for hurting your tender souls. My willingness to sacrifice all for you was masterfully manipulated into something very ugly. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good." Addressing the influence of Jody Hildebrandt, Ruby admitted, "I was led to believe the world was an evil place. For the past 4 years, I have chosen to follow counsel and guidance that have led me to a dark delusion.